Gray, cracked plaster. The smell of mold and something sour. His body wouldn't obey him. His arms were thin and felt like someone else's. His fingers were long and pale. They weren't his fingers. He tried to sit up and nearly fell out of bed. His head split with pain. There was a ringing in his ears. Someone gasped nearby. An old man in a worn doublet rushed over to him with a mug of water. The old man's hands were shaking. "Mr. Daniel, you're not feeling well. The carriage will be here in an hour, my lord." Daniel. His name was Daniel. He knew that. And yet, at the same time, he didn't. Two streams were swirling in his head. One belonged to this body, a skinny guy, the youngest son, a drunkard for a father, some kind of title. The second stream was different, a bridge, night, headlights in the water. A pickup truck plummets off the bridge into the river. Raccoon River, Iowa. He had been in Iowa. He managed shifts for 100 people. He calculated the cost of a bag of wheat. He fell asleep at the wheel and died. And now he was sitting in someone else's body, and the old man was calling him my lord. Daniel picked up the mug. The water was warm and bitter. He drank it all. His stomach cramped. This body hadn't eaten properly in a long time. He looked at his hands again. Black dirt caked under his fingernails. On his ring finger was a heavy ring bearing a coat of arms. On the table nearby lay a sealed parchment. The host's memory was coming back in fragments. Baron Helsgard. A title from a collateral line. The old baron had died childless. No one wanted this inheritance. No one except a scrawny necromancer from a destitute branch of the family, whom the capital had gladly sent packing. "Rule well, Baron. Good luck." The old man was still standing nearby. Daniel looked at him. "What is your name?" The old man blinked. "Henrik, my lord." "Your servant." "Servant. He has a servant. He has a title. He has a parchment with a seal and a ring bearing the coat of arms. And he has necromancy." His memory reminded him of that too. A weak necromancer. The shame of the family. The magic of the dead. In this world, that sounded like a death sentence. Daniel stood up. His legs were shaking. He walked over to the window and looked outside. Crooked fences. A stony field. In the distance, a dark wall of forest on the horizon. The sky was gray and low. Not a single tractor. Not a single combine harvester. Not a single power line. The Middle Ages. He'd ended up in the Middle Ages. Henrik was saying something behind him, about a carriage, about the road, about the barony. Daniel wasn't listening. He was doing the math. 40,000 hectares. In Iowa, that would be an average-sized farm. 20 people. 4 combine harvesters. A net profit of $1.5 million per season. Here, that's a death sentence, because there are neither combines nor people. He turned to Henrik. "How many peasants are there in the barony?" The old man hesitated. 42, my lord. Maybe a little fewer. 3 left in the winter. 42, for 40,000 hectares. Daniel closed his eyes. In Iowa, they'd deploy at least 150 pieces of equipment and 20 operators for an area like this. Here, there are 42 peasants with wooden plows. How much grain is in the granary? Henrik turned even paler. "Enough for 2 months, my lord. If we conserve it. Winter is 7 months away. 2 months' worth of grain. 42 people. Not a single soldier. Land that no one wants. A title that no one wants. And necromancy." Daniel looked at his skinny hands again. Necromancy. The dead rise and follow orders. That was all he could remember so far about this body's abilities. Here, it was considered a weapon. A despised and weak weapon. But Daniel didn't think in terms of weapons. He thought in terms of man-hours. 1 skeleton. 24 hours of work a day. No food, no sleep, no pay, no complaints. 5 skeletons in the field are equal to 20 living peasants on the day shift. 10 skeletons are equal to 40. This isn't an army. It's a workforce. Free, tireless, obedient. Something clicked. That very same click he knew from his past life. When you look at a ravaged field and suddenly see not a problem but a system, a bottleneck. That's not a resource. A bottleneck is what you didn't think to count. Henrik. The old man stood at attention. Yes, my lord? Cancel the carriage. We're not going anywhere. We're going to the barony. Right now. Henrik opened his mouth. But my lord, the ceremony is scheduled for right now. Daniel picked up the parchment from the table. He slid the ring further down his finger. He walked out of the room. The hallway was narrow and dark. It smelled musty. The stairs creaked with every step. This was neither a castle nor a manor. It was a cheap city apartment, the final dwelling of a man whom no one expected and no one wanted. Daniel stepped out onto the street. The city was large and dirty, the capital of the kingdom of Astorn. People walked by. No one paid any attention to the skinny young man with dark circles under his eyes. Henrik scurried after him. My lord, the carriage won't be here for another hour. I know. Find a carriage. Anyone. We're leaving. Henrik looked at him strangely. In 30 years of service, he had seen 3 barons of Asher. All had been quiet, downtrodden men who meekly traveled to the borderlands to die. This one was different. This one was calculating something in his head and looked as if he saw something no one else could see. Henrik found a wagon half an hour later. A one-horse wagon. The driver asked for 3 silver coins for the trip to Hellsgard. Henrik haggled. Daniel said nothing. He sat on the edge of the wagon and watched the town recede behind them. The road was rutted, rocks and ruts. The wagon jolted so much that his teeth chattered. Daniel endured it. He was used to bad roads. In Iowa, the back roads weren't any better after it rained. Only there, it was a pickup truck with suspension. And here, just bare wooden planks. A 4-day journey. Henrik told stories along the way. Daniel listened and took it all in. The kingdom of Astorn, an old feudal world. Power is measured by 3 things: land, grain, and people. Magic is rare and restricted to certain castes. Battle mages serve the crown. Healers serve the Church of Light. Elementalists work for the golds. Necromancy is not officially banned. The law was written long ago and is full of loopholes, but it is so widely disregarded that a necromancer from a noble family is quietly married off to a distant cousin and sent to the borderlands to die. That is exactly what happened to his body. They didn't even have time to marry him off. They just sent him away. The Church of Light has been campaigning for a complete ban on necromancy for 200 years. In 3 years, the council will almost certainly vote in favor of it. 3 years. Daniel remembered that number. 3 years to prove that necromancy is not a weapon, but a tool. Or they'll burn him as a heretic. The kingdom was crumbling. 3 consecutive years of crop failure in the east. The war with the Principality of Valen had cost them 2 duchies. Taxes were rising. Refugees were pouring south and west, and no one wanted them because there was nothing to feed them. Daniel listened and nodded. He'd seen it all before. Not here. In Iowa. When the 2019 flood washed away half the crops in 3 counties, farmers went bankrupt and migrants poured into the cities. Same pattern, different setting. On the 2nd day of their journey, they passed through the city of Mervale, a large stone city with a fortress wall. Henrik lowered his voice. Margrave Osgood Valentine is based here, an ambitious warrior. He dreams of clearing the border and annexing Hellsgard to his domains. Daniel took note. A Margrave, their closest neighbor. He wants their land. That means conflict. Not now, but soon. On the 3rd day, the road grew worse. Rocks gave way to gravel. The grass withered. The trees grew shorter and more crooked. The air smelled of something bitter. Cursed land. Henrik crossed himself. 200 years ago, the last great war against the undead took place here. Since then, the land has failed to yield a proper harvest. The water was bitter. The neighbors considered these 40,000 hectares a wasteland. Daniel jumped down from the wagon. He crouched down. He scooped up a handful of soil. He rubbed it between his fingers. He brought it to his nose. Sour, dense, clayey with a hint of peat. He looked at the ditch by the road. The water stood a palm's width from the edge. It wouldn't drain away. There was no drainage. He mentally estimated the acidity. Around 5 on the pH scale. Maybe 4.5. In Iowa, soils like this were remediated in 2 growing seasons. liming, drainage ditches, clover for plow under, crop rotation. This land isn't cursed. It's just acidic and waterlogged. No magic involved, just basic agronomy. Daniel climbed back into the wagon. Henrik looked at him in bewilderment. "My lord, why were you sniffing the soil?" "I was checking something." "Henrik, it's not cursed. It's just neglected." The old man shook his head. He didn't understand, but he remembered. On the fourth day they arrived. Hellshard. Daniel had expected to see a castle. He saw a ruin, a 3-story stone tower. One wall had sagged. The roof was patched up haphazardly. Around it was a courtyard with a crooked fence. Beyond the fence lay the village, 12 houses, some without roofs. The fields beyond the village were gray and empty. In the distance stood the dark wall of the cursed forest. Closer than he'd thought, maybe a 2-hour walk. A group of people stood at the castle gates. 42 people. His peasants. The entire population of the Hellshard barony. Daniel climbed down from the wagon and looked at them. Gaunt faces. Lifeless eyes. Children with swollen bellies. Women in patched dresses. Men with hands covered in calluses all the way up to their elbows. An old man stood at the front, sturdy, with a white beard and a stern gaze. He looked at Daniel without fear and without hope. He simply looked, like a man accustomed to burying barons. The village elder bowed briefly. "My lord, welcome to Hellshard. My name is Jorgen." Daniel nodded. "Jorgen, show me everything." The granaries, the fields, the wells, every house. Jorgen looked at him in surprise. The previous barons hadn't asked to see the houses. The previous barons would lock themselves in the tower and drink. This one wanted to count. They set off. Daniel walked and counted. 1 granary. Enough grain in it to last 2 months. Maybe a month and a half if the summer is hot and water consumption goes up. 3 wells. 2 yield bitter water. 1 is more or less usable. 16 houses. 4 are uninhabitable. Almost no tools. 5 plows. 2 of them are broken. About 10 shovels. 3 axes. Not a single saw. No smithy. There's no mill. There's no bakery. Grain is pounded by hand in mortars. Daniel was silent. He was taking it all in. The table was taking shape in his mind. Columns. Rows. Shortages. Bottlenecks. Henrik followed behind, breathing heavily. The old man wasn't used to walking so much. Jorgen walked beside Daniel, silently. He could see that this new baron was calculating, and that was something new. Toward the end of the tour, Jorgen led him to a field beyond the village. The only field where anything was growing. Small, maybe 5 hectares. Green shoots were pushing through the gray earth. "My lord, the soil here is somewhat fertile. We're preserving it. Only 5 men can plow it. We can't support any more than that." Daniel crouched down. He scooped up a handful of soil, rubbed it between his fingers, sniffed it. The same acidic soil. Slightly better than by the road. Maybe a pH of 5.5. He looked at the drainage ditch next to the field. Silted up. Water standing there. It won't drain. Classic. He stood up, looked at Jorgen. "Jorgen, where's the nearest cemetery?" The old man flinched. He understood. Everyone understood. The word necromancer had reached the village before the baron himself. "Behind the village, my lord, the old one. That's where those who've died over the last 40 years lie. Lead the way." The cemetery was small. Wooden crosses. Some were crooked. The ground had sunk over the graves. Daniel stood in the center. He opened his eyes. The memory of his new body told him what to do. Necromancy wasn't a spell. It was a sensation, like reaching out into the darkness and feeling for a thread. Every grave reached out to him in a thin line. Cold. Silent. He pulled. The earth trembled. The peasants behind him gasped. Someone screamed. Someone fell to their knees. The earth parted in 12 places at once. Bones rose slowly, gathered, assembled. Their joints clicked into place. Daniel felt each one of them. 12 points in his mind. 12 cold sparks. He imbued each one with a mana capsule, a tiny cluster of his own power. It cost him nearly his entire reserve. His head spun. His vision darkened. But the 12 skeletons stood before him, straight, motionless. waiting for a command. Daniel turned around. The villagers stood in terror. The women clutched their children to their chests. The men clenched their fists. Jorgen had turned pale, but he stood his ground. He didn't run. Daniel looked him in the eyes. Then he turned to the skeletons. 6 shovels and 6 baskets. Henrik brought the tools with trembling hands. Daniel handed the shovels to 6 skeletons, the baskets to the other 6. He pointed to the ditch by the field. Dig it 1/2 meter deeper, the dirt onto the field, in an even layer. The skeletons set to work, silently, steadily, without a single superfluous movement. 6 dug, 6 carried. The rhythm was perfect, mechanical. The peasants watched. No one left. Fear mingled with something else, something they couldn't name. The skeletons worked until sunset. Half the ditch had been cleared. They worked after sunset. They didn't need light. They didn't need rest. By morning, the village's entire drainage system had been cleared. 10 years' worth of work that the living couldn't manage. In a single night. Daniel stood by the field and watched as the water drained into the ditches. The soil was beginning to breathe. By evening, it would be dry. In a week, they'd be able to plow a new plot. Jorgen stood nearby. The next morning began with a scream. A woman was shrieking by the well. Daniel rushed out of the tower barefoot. 2 skeletons stood by the well with buckets. They were drawing water. Daniel had ordered them to fill the barrels with water at night for irrigation. He had forgotten to warn the village. The woman was sitting on the ground, making the sign of the cross. 2 men with axes stood nearby. They were looking at the skeletons and didn't know what to do. The skeletons paid no attention to them. They were simply drawing water. Daniel approached. He stood between the people and the skeletons. He looked at the woman. She was young, maybe 25. Thin. Her hands were red from work. "What's your name?" The woman stared at him with wide eyes. "Martha, my lord. Martha. These 2 are drawing water for irrigation. They won't harm you." "They can't harm you. They only do what I tell them to do." Martha didn't answer. She sat there, trembling. Daniel sighed. He turned to the skeletons. "Put down the buckets. Step back 20 paces. Wait." The skeletons obeyed, precisely and without delay. 20 paces. They stood still. Dead. Martha looked at them, then at Daniel. Then she stood up, picked up the buckets, left, without saying a word. One of the men with the axe spat and left as well. The second one stayed. He looked at Daniel. "My lord." "The people are afraid." Daniel nodded. "I know. What's your name?" "Bran." "Bran. What else can you do besides plowing?" The man paused. "A little carpentry. My father taught me." "Good. You won't be plowing anymore. You're a carpenter now. Come to the tower this afternoon." Bran looked at him, puzzled. But he nodded. He left. Daniel stood by the well and thought. Fear. That was his main enemy right now. Not hunger. Not the Margrave. Fear. Since childhood, the Church of Light had drummed one idea into these people's heads. The dead must lie on the ground. Anything else is an abomination. He couldn't change their minds with words. Words are worthless when a person sees a skeleton by their well. There was only one way he could change their minds. Results. Daniel returned to the tower. Henrik had prepared breakfast, porridge made from rancid barley. It tasted like cardboard soaked in swamp water. Daniel ate it all. His body needed calories. Then he sat down at the table. On the table lay a piece of cloth with his notes from the previous day. He took out another piece. He began to draw up a plan. In Iowa, it was called an operations map. Here, it was a scrap of cloth with charcoal notes. But the principle was the same. Resources. 42 people. 12 skeletons. 2 months' worth of grain. 5 working plows. 3 axes. 10 shovels. Tasks by priority. First, expand the planting area. Currently 5 hectares. We need at least 50 by midsummer to harvest before winter. Second, lime the soil. We need limestone. Where to get it? Ask Jorgen. Third, drainage on the new plots. The skeletons can handle it. Fourth, housing. 4 houses are uninhabitable. Repair them or build new ones. 5th, the blacksmith shop. Without a blacksmith shop, there are no tools. Without tools, there's nothing. 6th, the mill. Marta is pounding grain in a mortar. There's blood on her palms. Each item on the list represents a specific person. Daniel didn't think in abstract terms. Expanding the fields meant that Jorgen would stop waking up at night worried that the grain would run out. The mill meant that Marta's hands would heal. The smithy meant that B-Ran would get a proper plane instead of a dull axe. He finished the list. He looked at it. It was long. Too long for 12 skeletons and 2 months' worth of grain. But doable. If they worked like they did in Iowa. Around the clock. No days off. No breaks. That's exactly what the skeletons allow. They don't sleep. They don't get tired. They don't complain to the union. Jorgen arrived in the afternoon. He brought 6 others with him, those who can count and have a knack for craftsmanship. Bran is a carpenter. Tobias is a guy in his 20s, thin, nervous. The only one in the village who can read and write. His mother was the daughter of an itinerant scribe. She taught her son before she died. Martha. She came. Daniel wasn't expecting her. She still looked at him warily, but she came. An old man named Gustav, a former baker. His hands tremble, but his eyes are clear. A young woman named Helga, a weaver. And a boy of about 14 named Eric, Jorgen's son, quick and fearless. In the morning, he walked up to the skeleton and touched its finger. The skeleton didn't move. Eric laughed. Daniel sat them down in front of the tower. He spread out his rag with notes on it on a rock. He began to speak. He didn't give a speech. He explained the task. Just as a manager explains a task to a foreman. Bran, you're the head carpenter now. Your job? Repair houses. Build new ones. The skeletons will bring the materials. Haul logs. Saw wood. But you tell them what to do, not me, you. Bran opened his mouth. I tell the dead what to do. You tell me. I pass the orders on to them. But you're the one in charge on site. You know wood. They don't. Bran paused. Then he nodded. Tobias, you're now Hellsguard's scribe. Your job? To record everything. How much grain is in the granary? How many people are in the village? How many skeletons are in each section? How many days are left until each skeleton needs to be replaced? Tobias turned pale. That's a lot. It's necessary. If you take a sick day tomorrow and no one can continue your records, we'll have a problem. That's why you're also training Eric. Eric will be your assistant. The boy beamed. Gustav, you need an oven. I'll build you a bakery. The skeletons will lay the walls in 2 days. You'll bake bread, real bread, not this porridge we're all choking on. Gustav straightened up. For the first time in a long while, his eyes sparkled. Helga, the spinning room. We need wool and flax. Where's the nearest source? Helga thought for a moment. Flax grows wild by the river, my lord, south of the forest. Wool. We used to have sheep, but the last one was slaughtered 2 years ago. Flax, for starters. The skeletons will gather it. You'll spin it. Marta. The woman flinched. A mill. I'll build a mill. The skeletons will build it. You won't be pounding grain in a mortar anymore. Marta looked at her red palms, then at Daniel. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression had changed, just a little. Jorgen, you're the manager of the living. All the people's questions go through you. Complaints, requests, disputes, you decide. If you can't decide, come to me. Jorgen nodded. He understood this role. He'd been doing it for 30 years. Only now, for the first time, someone had given it a title. And I'm the manager of the dead. Silence. Everyone was looking at him. Daniel looked at each of them in turn. I know you're afraid of skeletons. That's normal. You've been told since childhood that the dead should lie in the ground. I won't argue with your beliefs. I ask for one thing. Give me 3 months. In 3 months, you'll decide for yourselves. If you feel uneasy, if the skeletons harm anyone, if I turn out to be the monster you think I am, I'll leave. I'll take the skeletons and leave. But give me 3 months. The silence lingered for a long time. Then Jorgen stood up. 3 months, my lord. The people looked to the village elder. To them, Jorgen was an authority. If Jorgen said 3 months, then it meant 3 months. They dispersed. Daniel was left alone by the tower. Henrik stood beside him. "My lord, will you really leave in 3 months if it doesn't work out?" "No, Henrik, I won't leave. Because it will work out." Daniel spent the rest of the day with the skeletons. He reassigned the tasks. 4 skeletons to clear the new field. 2 to cut stone for the bakery. 2 to cut logs. 4 remained on the drainage work. He stood next to each group. He demonstrated. He explained. The skeletons didn't understand words. They responded to mental images. Daniel visualized the action, and the skeleton carried it out. The clearer the image, the more precise the work. It was like programming. Simple commands. Dig here. 1/2 meter deep. 1 meter wide. Put the dirt over there. Repeat until the end of the trench. The skeleton carried out the command. Precisely. Without variation, without error, without initiative. The perfect worker for an assembly line task. By evening, Daniel was exhausted. Not physically, mentally. Managing 12 skeletons at once was draining him completely. His head was splitting. His vision was double. He lay on a straw mattress in the tower, counting the cracks in the ceiling. 2 hours of maintenance a day. That's the minimum. Checking each skeleton, recharging the mana capsule if it ran low, replacing them if a bone cracked. Today he'd spent 3 hours on maintenance, because he hadn't gotten the hang of it yet. In a week, it'll be faster. In a month, 2 hours. That's manageable. But there's a problem. 12 skeletons aren't enough. He needs at least 50 to meet the quota. 50 skeletons. And there are maybe 30 graves left in the cemetery, and his mana isn't infinite. 12 today was his limit. Mana regenerates. His body's memory reminded him. Every day his mana reserve grows slightly, like a muscle from exercise. In a week, he'll be able to handle 15. In a month, 20. But 50 won't happen in a month. That'll take 2 or 3 months. So he needs another source of bones. The cursed forest. 200 years ago, there was a war there. Thousands died. The bones lie in the ground, waiting. But the forest is dangerous. All sorts of creatures roam there. Wild undead. Beasts. Going there alone would be foolish, but there are no other options. Daniel closed his eyes. Morning. I'll decide in the morning. The next day, he took 4 skeletons and set off for the forest. Jorgen tried to talk him out of it. "My lord, no one goes there. It's death." Daniel looked at him. "Jorgen, there are bones there, and I need bones." The old man shook his head, but he didn't argue. Daniel walked for 2 hours across the rocky wasteland. The skeletons followed him in even formation. 4 figures with shovels. The quiet clatter of bones against stone. As he approached the forest, the air changed. It grew thicker. Colder. It smelled of earth and something Swedish. Rot. The trees were black. Not charred, just black. The bark was dark as coal. The leaves were dark green, almost blue. The grass crunched under his feet. Daniel stopped at the edge of the forest. He didn't go in. He stood there and sensed. Necromancy gave him a sense of the dead, like radar. He closed his eyes and reached out with his senses into the forest. Bones. Lots of bones. So many. They lay shallow. 1/2 meter. A meter at most. Layer upon layer. A battlefield. 200 years ago, thousands lay here. Daniel opened his eyes. He smiled. For the first time in 5 days. He sent 2 skeletons ahead, 10 steps into the forest, to dig. They dug. A minute later, a shovel clanged against a bone. White. Large. A human femur. The skeletons retrieved the bones and placed them in baskets. In an hour, they had filled 4 baskets. Daniel didn't go any deeper. 10 steps from the edge of the forest. No further. Caution. He still doesn't know what lives in this forest. That evening, he sat in the tower's courtyard. Before him lay a mountain of bones. Clean. Old. He didn't need a whole body. Necromancy assembles a skeleton from whatever is available. 10 different people. 1 leg from one. An arm from another. A skull from a third. Magic brings them together. Creates a functional unit. Daniel waited until morning. He rested. His mana had almost fully recovered. He raised 8 more skeletons. 20. His head was buzzing. His eyes were watering. 20 points of consciousness. 20 cold little flames. Under control. Barely, but controllable. Jorgen stood nearby and watched. He said nothing. 20. My lord, that's a lot. This is just the beginning, Jorgen, Daniel said. I need 50. The old man crossed himself, but he said nothing. By the end of the first week, Daniel had reorganized the village's work. The 5 living men no longer plowed. The skeletons plowed. 8 skeletons pulled plows across the newly cleared field. 24 hours a day, furrow after furrow. Even, deep, perfect. The living men were busy with other tasks. Bran was repairing houses. 2 skeletons brought him planks and logs. He commanded them hesitantly. He shouted. Then he realized that shouting was pointless. They couldn't hear him. Daniel taught him to use hand signals and then to transmit mental commands through his connection. The system was clumsy, but it worked. Gustav got his bakery on the 7th day. 4 skeletons laid the stone walls in 2 days. Bran put up the roof in a single day. Gustav built the oven himself. His hands were shaking, but he knew every brick. By evening, the oven was ready. In the morning, he baked his first loaf of bread. Daniel stood by the bakery and watched as the old man pulled a round loaf out of the oven. It was hot. The first refugees arrived at the beginning of the 2nd month. 5 of them. The family of Martin, the blacksmith from the south. Martin himself, his wife Agnes, their 2 sons, aged 7 and 10, and Agnes's mother, an old woman who could barely walk. They stood at the gates of Hellsgard and looked out at the village, at the fields where skeletons were pulling plows, at the bakery from which smoke was rising, at Brana, who was building a new house, with 2 skeletons handing him planks. Martin was a big man, broad-shouldered, hands like shovels, his face scorched by the forge. He looked at the skeletons and his jaw clenched. Then he looked at his sons, thin with sunken cheeks. The youngest was clinging to his mother's skirt and wouldn't let go. Jorgen led them to Daniel. My lord, strangers, they say they're from the south. Daniel looked at Martin. Where from? Martin replied that they were from Wertheim. The town burned down. The Valen troops. They destroyed the smithy. We've been walking north for 3 months. They were driven out everywhere. Nowhere would take them in. We have nothing to feed you, they were told. In Mirwale, the Margrave's guards took away their last wagon with tools. All that remained was what Martin carried on his back, a hammer, tongs, and an anvil. He'd been hauling the anvil on his back for 3 days. Daniel looked at the anvil, then at Martin, a blacksmith. Martin nodded. Daniel turned to Jorgen. House number 4, the one Bran repaired yesterday. It's vacant. Jorgen nodded. Martin, that's your house. The smithy will be ready in 3 days. The skeletons will build it. Put the anvil wherever it's convenient. We'll find the iron. Martin stood there blinking. He was waiting to be sent away, or to be hired in exchange for food and a place in the barn. He wasn't expecting a house. My lord, we have nothing to pay you with. Daniel looked at his hammer, at his hands. You're a blacksmith, Martin, in a village where there isn't a single blacksmith. You've already paid. Martin took his family and headed for the house. Agnes was crying quietly, holding her youngest son close. The old woman walked in silence. She no longer believed in anything. But a roof over their heads was a roof over their heads. 3 days later, the smithy stood ready. 4 skeletons had built the walls. Bran put the roof on with the help of 2 more. Martin set up the anvil. He stoked the forge. The first clang of the hammer striking metal echoed throughout the village. People came out of their houses. They stood and listened. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer. A sound that meant one thing. People live here. People build here. People don't die here. Daniel stood by the smithy and watched Martin work. The first order? Nails. 200 of them. For Bran. Then door hinges. Then new shovels. Martin worked like a man possessed. 12 hours on the first day. Agnes brought him food right to the anvil. He couldn't stop. 3 months without work. 3 months homeless. Now he had a roof over his head and a forge. Daniel added Martin to the chart. Blacksmith. 1. Productivity. High. Needs. Iron, coal, leather for an apron. An assistant in 2 months when the workload increases. Word spread quickly. Daniel didn't know how. There was no internet in this world. But rumors traveled faster than a horse. The Baron who takes everyone in. The Baron who's dead work while the living eat bread. The Baron who provides a home and a job. 2 weeks after Martin, 20 more people arrived. Then another 30. By the end of the second month, 150 people were living in Hellsgard. Daniel received each one personally. He would sit down at the table by the tower. He asked 3 questions. Name. Where are you from? What can you do? Tobias took notes. A carpenter was given a house and a spot on Brand's crew. A seamstress was given a spot at Helga's spinning mill. A baker went to Gustav. A peasant with no special skills went to Jorgen. Jorgen decided, train them or put them to work. No one plows. The skeletons do the plowing. By this time, there were 50 skeletons. Daniel had reached his limit at that point and couldn't expand any further. 50 little lights burned steadily in his mind. Under control, but on the edge. 2 hours of maintenance every day. Morning and evening. Check. Update. Replacement. Tobias kept track of the skeletons in a separate logbook. Number. Date activated. Estimated service life. Task. Section. Status. Eric came up with his own symbols. A green dot meant operational. A yellow dot meant wear and tear. A red dot meant replacement within the next 5 days. Daniel looked at this system and smiled. In Iowa, it was called a dashboard. Here, a 14-year-old kid had invented it using ink dots on parchment. The first field planted. 200 hectares of rye. The skeletons plowed it. The skeletons had sown it. Daniel walked through the field himself to check the seeding depth. 3 to 4 centimeters. No deeper, no shallower. The skeletons carried out the work precisely. They knew no fatigue and didn't lose their concentration by evening like living sowers. Every grain in its place. Jorgen walked through the field and shook his head. In 30 years, he hadn't seen such even rows. My lord, how do you know about the land? Daniel thought for a moment. Books, Jorgen. Lots of books. The old man didn't believe him, but he didn't ask any further questions. The second month brought another development. Lydia. She arrived at the end of the month, a 19-year-old girl with 3 younger brothers. The boys were 7, 5, and 3 years old. The youngest was sitting in her arms, thin, with huge eyes. Lydia was the daughter of the village priest of the Church of Light. Her father had died a month ago. The village had driven them out. Why? Because before he died, the priest had said something about the light that the elders didn't like. Lydia didn't specify exactly what, but her eyes said the wound was fresh. She stood by the gate and looked at the skeletons. 2 of them were carrying logs past her. Lydia turned pale. She held her youngest brother tighter. The middle one hid behind her skirt. The oldest stood in front of her, a 7-year-old boy with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white. Daniel approached. He looked at her, at her brothers, at the boy with his fists clenched. What's your name? Lydia Otri. My father was a priest of light. She said it like a challenge, like a shield. I'm a necromancer. Daniel said it without a challenge, just a fact. Lydia pressed her lips together. I know. Daniel nodded. You have 3 brothers and no home. I have a home but no priest. You can read? Lydia blinked. Yes. Count? Yes. Cook? Yes. Your house? The second one from the blacksmiths. Gustav will give you bread. Jorgen will show you the way. The tax collector arrived with 5 mounted guards. A fat man in a velvet doublet, bearing the Margrave's coat of arms on his chest. His name was Pharaoh. He rode into Hellsgard as if he were coming home. His horse stepped over the ditch. Pharaoh looked around. He saw the fields. He saw skeletons in the fields. He turned pale. Then he pulled himself together. He dismounted. He demanded to see the Baron. Daniel emerged from the tower. He was dressed in work clothes, a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, mud-stained pants, and his hands covered in dirt. He had just been checking the drainage ditch on the eastern plot. Pharaoh looked down at him from head to toe. Although Daniel was taller, Pharaoh knew how to look down on anyone. "Baron Asher, I have come on behalf of Margrave Osgood Wallentain to demand the annual tribute. Under the old code, Hellsgard owes the Margraviate 20 sacks of grain and 5 silver coins a year." Daniel listened. 20 sacks. That was almost a tenth of what was in the granary. 5 silver coins. He had 11 silver coins in total. Pharaoh took out a parchment. He held it out. It bore the Margrave seal. "It's all legal. It's all correct." Hellsgard had been paying this tribute for 200 years. Every baron had paid it. Daniel took the parchment. He read it. He looked at Pharaoh. "You have a royal order to collect the tribute." Pharaoh blinked. "What order?" "A royal one. Hellsgard is a barony under the direct vassalage of the crown, not under the Margraviate. Only the crown or its authorized representative can demand tribute. You have such a document." Pharaoh opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's an old statute, 200 years old." Daniel nodded. 200 years of illegal tax collection. Impressive. Tell the Margrave that Baron Hellsgard will be happy to discuss this matter through the royal treasury. Until then, the tax is not Pharaoh flushed. The guards behind him exchanged glances. They were looking at the skeletons in the field. The skeletons continued plowing. They paid no attention. Pharaoh leaned toward Daniel. His voice grew quieter. "Boy, you don't understand who you're dealing with. Margrave Valentine controls all trade in this region, all the roads, all the markets. Without his permission, you won't sell a single sack of grain." Daniel looked at him, then at the guards, then back at Pharaoh. "Tell the Margrave something else. I keep a record of every sack of grain that enters and leaves Hellsgard, every single one. And I have a scribe who knows how to copy documents. If the Margrave wants to discuss trade matters, I'm open to negotiations. If the Margrave wants to make threats, let him come himself." Silence. Pharaoh stood there, staring at the skinny young man in a dirty shirt who had just defied the Margrave. Then he turned to the guards. "The horse. He's gone." Without taking a single sack. But the anger on his face spoke volumes. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Jorgen approached Daniel once the dust from the hooves had settled. "My lord, you've just made yourself an enemy." Daniel nodded. "I know, Jorgen. But 20 sacks is 120 days' worth of food for 10 people. I can't afford to feed the Margrave when my people are barely scraping by until harvest time." Jorgen was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "My people." He said, "My people." The old man noticed that. The days passed. Daniel worked 18 hours a day, 6 hours of sleep. The rest was work. Morning. Checking the skeletons, replenishing the mana capsules, replacing the worn-out ones. Then a tour of the fields. Checking the seedlings. Checking the drainage. Checking the soil's acidity. He taught Tobias a simple test. Take a handful of soil, add vinegar. If it fizzes, it's alkaline. If it doesn't fizz, it's acidic. We need limestone. We found some limestone. Eric found it. The boy was running around the neighborhood like an all-terrain vehicle, and one day brought back a white rock. "My lord, what's this?" Daniel took a look. Limestone, pure. "Where from?" "From the hill to the west. There's a whole cliff there." Daniel headed for the hill, a 4-hour walk. But it was worth it. The cliff. White. Huge. Thousands of metric tons of limestone in the open air. He stood by the cliff and laughed, out loud, for the first time. In Iowa, they'd pay $100,000 to have this limestone delivered. Here it lay for free, just a 4-hour walk away. 10 skeletons began quarrying the limestone the next day, crushing it, loading it into baskets, carrying it to the village. Another 5 skeletons spread it over the fields, a thin layer, evenly. The soil would begin to deacidify in 2 or 3 weeks. By the next planting season, the acidity will drop to 6. Maybe 6.5. That's normal soil, not cursed. Just soil. Jorgen stood at the edge of the field and watched as the skeletons scattered the white powder. My lord, what is this? Lime. It heals the soil. Heals? The soil? Daniel nodded. In a month, we'll try the water from the ditch. It'll be less bitter. Jorgen shook his head. For 30 years, he'd believed the land was cursed, that the gods had punished Hellsgard for past sins. But it turned out the land just needed lime. Tobias wrote a new entry in the ledger. Limestone. Source. Western Hill. Distance. 4 hours. Skeletons assigned. 15. Consumption. 20 baskets a day. Coverage. 4 hectares a day. Daniel looked at the entries and nodded. You're a quick learner. Tobias blushed. No one had ever praised him for his ability to count before. In the village, counting was considered a useless skill. Why count when there's nothing to count? Now there was something. 3rd month. Population, 250 people. Skeletons, 50. 200 hectares sown. The rye was growing well. The drainage system was working. Liming was proceeding on schedule. Martin's blacksmith shop clanged nonstop. Bran was building his 4th house this week. His crew had grown to 7 carpenters. The skeleton helpers carried logs around the clock. A house went up in 3 or 4 days. The frame, walls, roof, door, windows later. The main thing is the roof and the walls. People need a roof. Everything else comes later. Maylin showed up in the middle of the 3rd month. She arrived with a wagon train. 2 wagons. One loaded with salt, the other with seeds. Maylin was short, black-haired, with slanted eyes and a sharp gaze that assessed everything and everyone in 3 seconds. She was a merchant, half-blood. Her father was a merchant from the Far East. Her mother, a royal subject. Her whole life spent between 2 worlds. Never quite at home anywhere. She jumped down from the cart, looked around, saw the skeletons, didn't flinch. Looked at the fields, at the houses, at the blacksmith shop, at the bakery. She approached Daniel. Baron Asher, I'm Maylin Pack. I've brought salt and seeds. The price is fair, if you have anything to pay with. Daniel looked at her. How do you want me to pay? With grain, after the harvest. 2 sacks of rye for a sack of salt. 3 sacks for a sack of seeds. Daniel did the math in his head. That's expensive. The usual price is 1 sack for 1 sack. The usual price in a usual place. This isn't a usual place. It takes 4 days to get here on a rough road through the Margrave's territory, and he doesn't like it when anyone trades bypassing his market. Daniel looked at her with interest. She knew about the Margrave. She knew about the risk, and she came anyway. 1.5 sacks for salt, 2 for seeds, and a room for the night. With dinner. Maylin narrowed her eyes. 2 for salt, 2.5 for seeds. The room and dinner are on me. Plus information. What kind of information? Prices at the markets in Mervale and the south. Caravan routes. Which goods are moving and which are stagnating. Daniel held out his hand. Maylin shook it, firmly. By the end of the 3rd month, Daniel lost a skeleton for the first time. Not from wear and tear. It was a breakdown. Skeleton number 7, according to Tobias's records, was working at the quarry near the Western Hill. Crushing limestone. Blow after blow. 24 hours a day. On the 19th day of work, its right arm split open. The bone couldn't take it. The skeleton continued working with its left arm. Then a section of the spine cracked. The skeleton collapsed. It crumbled. The mana capsule went dark. Tobias recorded it. Skeleton number 7. Decommissioned. Reason? Mechanical wear from impact loads. Service life. 19 days instead of the estimated 40. Daniel stood over the pile of bones and thought. In A, this was called equipment failure due to improper operating conditions. He had put the skeleton to work for a task it wasn't suited for. Impact loads destroy bones faster than digging or carrying. So specialization is needed. Not all skeletons are the same. Large bones for heavy work, small ones for light work, and no impact tasks without reinforcement. He returned to the village, sat down with Tobias, rewrote the entire table, new categories, plow skeleton, digger skeleton, porter skeleton, lumberjack skeleton, Stonemason skeleton. Each category has its own set of bones, its own rated load, its own service life. Tobias looked at the table and slowly shook his head. My lord. This. It's like herding a flock, only a flock of the dead. Daniel looked at him. It's like running a farm, Tobias. Only instead of cows and tractors, we have skeletons. What are tractors? Never mind. Write it down. Tobias wrote. Eric drew icons for each type of skeleton, an axe for a lumberjack, a shovel for a digger, an ear of wheat for a plowman. The system was taking on details, living details. Details that living people came up with because Daniel gave them room to think. That was more important than any skeleton. In the middle of the month, what Daniel had been waiting for happened. Lydia came to see him. She hadn't come for 2 months. She'd been living in her own house. She fed her brothers bread from the baker's Gustav's bakery. She carried water from the well. She prayed every evening. And she didn't speak to Daniel. Not once. She approached the tower. Daniel was sitting at the table, reviewing Tobias's notes. He looked up. Lydia stood upright, her hands folded in front of her. Her eyes were serious. Baron Asher. Daniel. Lydia. I want to help. Daniel showed no surprise. Though he was surprised. By what? By the situation. By the people. You take in refugees every week. Women come with children. They're scared. They need someone to talk to them. Not about work. About life. About how it's safe here. You don't know how to do that. Daniel wanted to object. Then he thought better of it. She's right. He didn't know how to comfort people. He knew how to count and build. But when a refugee woman with 3 children stood at the gate, crying from exhaustion, Daniel didn't know what to say to her. He gave her a home and food, but not words. I agree, said Lydia. You take in women and children. You house them. You explain things to them. You reassure them. Everything that's needed for this, blankets, food, and firewood, you take from the warehouse. Jorgen will grant you access. Lydia nodded. And one more thing. Yes. You're dead. They don't come into the houses. I know, you said so. But they walk the streets. The children see them. My brothers wake up at night. Daniel paused. The skeletons worked around the clock. At night, they returned from the fields through the village to the quarry and back. Past the houses. The clatter of bones on stone. Shadows in the moonlight. For a child, it's a nightmare. I'll build a separate road. Across the field. Past the village. The skeletons will walk only on that road. They won't be in the village except at the work sites. Lydia looked at him. For a long time. You're really going to do that? I've already calculated how many skeletons it would take to build the road in 2 days. Lydia almost smiled. Almost. Then she turned and walked away. Daniel watched her go. Then he jotted down a note in his notebook. A road for the skeletons. A bypass. Through the eastern field. 4 skeletons. 2 days. High priority. The road was built in 3 days, 1 day longer than planned. The ground turned out to be rockier than he'd thought. But the road was ready. Tamped down. Smooth. The skeletons had stopped walking through the village. Now their path led across the field beyond the outskirts. They were visible, but they were far away. Like workers on a distant site. Not scary, just far away. Lydia noticed. She didn't say anything, but something had changed in her eyes. Another half degree. At the end of the 3rd month, Maylin arrived on the first flight from the southern route. 2 wagons, salt, cloth, iron blanks for Martin, and news. Margrave Valentine had hired 2 groups of mercenaries. They were stationed on the road south of Mervale. Officially, they were bandits. Unofficially, everyone knew whose orders they were following. Maylin bypassed them via the mountain pass. But the pass will be closed by snow in 4 months. And the road through Mervale is now dangerous. Daniel listened, nodded, took notes. The Margrave is starting to apply pressure, gently for now. Bandits on the roads. Later it will be harsher. He needs a police force. Living fighters, not skeletons. Skeletons are good for labor, not for combat. They're too predictable. Too slow to react. They need a mental command for every action. In combat, where seconds mean the difference between life and death, That's fatal. Living soldiers think for themselves, but he has no soldiers and no time to train them. Or maybe he does. Among the refugees were former soldiers, 3 of them. One was missing his left arm. The second was lame. The third was a young guy named Ralph. He was in good shape, with a scar across his forehead. A deserter from a shattered Eastern regiment. He'd arrived in Hellsgard a month ago. He was quiet. He worked at Helga's spinning mill, hauling bales. Daniel called him over. "Ralph, you're a soldier." Ralph flinched. There was a "my lord." "Not anymore. I need an instructor." "For marksman." "Ralph, I'm a deserter. If the king's men find out." "There are no king's men here, Ralph. I'm here. And I need people who know how to shoot. There are bandits on the roads. If they come here, the skeletons won't stop them." Ralph was silent. Then he looked at the village, at the children running around the bakery, at Lydia, who was carrying water to her brothers, at Martha, who was hanging laundry outside the new house, at Martin, who was hammering away in the smithy. "What do I need?" "Bows, arrows, 20 men to start with, a training ground. Bran will make the bows. Arrows, Martin. We have a field. I'll find 20 volunteers." Ralph nodded. By evening, Daniel had a list of 23 volunteers, men and women. The youngest was 16, the oldest 42. They weren't soldiers. They were refugees, peasants, and artisans. But they saw that Hellsgard was giving them a home and bread. And they were ready to defend that home. Ralph began training the next morning. Daniel watched. 23 people with homemade bows stood in the field and shot wide of the targets. Every single one of them, without exception. Ralph didn't yell. He corrected them. He demonstrated. Corrected them again. Patient. Quiet. A good instructor. Daniel jotted it down in his notebook. Militia. 23 men. Level of training. 0. Estimated time to combat readiness. 3 to 4 months. Bows. 23. Quality. Poor. Replace at the first opportunity. Arrows. 60. 60. Not enough. Martin needs to make arrowheads. Ralph. Instructor. 1. Need a second one. He closed his notebook. He looked at the dark strip of the cursed forest. The wind was blowing from there, as always, cold, smelling of something old. In recent days, the wind had been blowing from the forest more often. Daniel noticed it. He chalked it up to the season. But inside, something gnawing at him, a subtle sensation, like someone staring at his back. That night he had a dream. A dark hall, stone walls, the floor covered in frost. Deep within the hall, someone sat on a throne. No face was visible, only the glint of metal, armor, old, rusty, a voice. Not a sound, but a vibration in his bones. Asher. Daniel woke up, drenched in sweat. His shirt was stuck to his back. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in the silence. Asher. His name was Asher, the surname of this body, the surname of the barons of Hellsgard. A dream. Just a dream. Stress. Lack of sleep. Commanding 50 skeletons for 18 hours a day. Of course, there would be nightmares. He lay back down, closed his eyes. Didn't fall asleep until morning. The 5th month began with the harvest. Hellsgard's first harvest. The rye had ripened. 200 hectares of golden ears of rye swayed in the wind. Daniel stepped out into the field that morning and stopped. He just stood there. He looked. In Iowa, he'd seen thousands of hectares of ripe wheat. It hadn't impressed him. There were combines, satellite monitoring, a supply chain from the field to the grain elevator. Here were 200 hectares of rye on formerly barren land that had been considered cursed for 30 years. And he'd grown it in 3 months. With the help of skeletons, lime, and the knowledge he'd brought from a world where all this was science, not magic. He stood and watched. And he felt something he hadn't felt in Iowa. Pride. Not for himself, for the field, for the land that had responded to his work. Jorgen stood beside him. He was silent. Then he said quietly, "My lord, I've lived on this land for 30 years. I've never seen a harvest like this. Never." Daniel nodded. "We'll harvest tomorrow. The skeletons will handle the harvesting. The living will handle the threshing and drying. Mei Lin is preparing a caravan for the south. The first commercial shipment. The harvest was brought in 10 days. The skeletons reaped around the clock. The living worked in 2 shifts. Threshing, drying, loading into the granary. The new granary that Bran built a month ago. It's large, stone foundation, wooden walls, a double-layered roof, dry and clean. Tobias was counting the sacks. Daniel stood nearby and waited. "My lord, 820 sacks." Daniel closed his eyes. 820. A typical harvest for 200 hectares in this region. 200 to 250 sacks. Maybe 300 in a good year. 820. 3 times the norm. Liming, drainage, proper planting depth, straight rows, round-the-clock irrigation when it was dry. Standard agronomy, no magic. Just knowledge from a world where this knowledge was first-year textbook material. Enough for the winter, enough for feed, enough for trade, and enough to show every refugee who comes. People don't starve to death here. People live here. Mei Lin set out with the first convoy 3 days later. 100 sacks of rye, south, over the pass. Daniel gave her 4 skeletons to guard the convoy, not for combat, for intimidation. The Margrave's bandits were used to robbing merchants with just 2 cart drivers. 4 skeletons with axes on the roof of the cart, that's a different story. Mei Lin smirked when she saw them. "My lord, are you serious?" "Absolutely. They won't attack. They'll just sit on the roof and watch." "That's enough." Mei Lin shook her head. But she accepted. The caravan returned 12 days later. 100 sacks of rye were traded for salt, cloth, iron, and 3 barrels of oil. Mei Lin brought something else as well, a contract. A merchant from the southern city of Aldenmark. He's willing to buy rye on a regular basis. 2 caravans a month, fixed price. Daniel read the contract and nodded. A trade route, the first one, a stable one. Winter arrived 2 weeks earlier than Jorgen had expected. The first snow fell at the beginning of the 6th month. Light, wet. But it was followed by a second, and a third. By mid-month, Hellsgard was blanketed in white. The temperature dropped every day. The wind from the forest carried a chill that penetrated to the bone. Daniel stood by the tower window and counted. 700 people. In 5 months, the population had grown from 42 to 700. Refugees were pouring in. New faces every week. New mouths to feed. New problems. The granary is full. 820 sacks of rye, minus 100 that left with Mei Lin's wagon train, minus a month's consumption for 700 people. About 120 sacks. 600 remain. Winter will last 4 to 5 months. Consumption is 120 sacks per month. That leaves 600. Just enough. Unless the population grows. But it will grow. The refugees won't stop just because of the snow. They'll stop when they die on the road. Or when they reach Hellsgard. Daniel closed his eyes. A bottleneck. Grain. A decision. Cut back on consumption or increase the stockpile. Cutting back on consumption means reducing rations. He won't do that. So, increase the stockpile. Mei Lin. She'd returned from her second trip south 3 days ago. She'd brought back fabric and oil. Daniel met her at the gate. Mei Lin, I need one more trip before the pass closes. Mei Lin looked up at the sky. Gray, low, snow hung in the air. The pass will close in 10 to 12 days, maybe sooner. You'll make it. If I leave tomorrow, take 200 sacks. Buy grain, any kind. Barley, oats, whatever you can find. The price doesn't matter. Mei Lin raised an eyebrow. The price doesn't matter? That's not like you, my lord. Price matters when there's time to haggle. We don't have time. Winter will be long, and people will keep coming. Mei Lin nodded. She didn't argue. She thought so too. She'd seen the same numbers. The convoy set out at dawn. 200 sacks of rye on 4 carts. 8 skeletons. 4 were pulling the carts instead of horses. 4 walked on either side, carrying axes. Mei Lin sat on the first cart. Next to her were 2 refugee carters she'd hired. Daniel watched as the convoy disappeared down the white road. Then he turned back to his work. Winter didn't mean a halt. Winter meant different tasks. Skeletons don't feel the cold. Skeletons work in any weather. 20 skeletons continued to prepare the fields for winter crops. The ground hadn't yet frozen to a sufficient depth. It was still possible. 15 skeletons were chopping wood for firewood, not in the cursed forest, in an ordinary grove to the south. Every house needs firewood. 700 people burn a lot. 10 skeletons were building. Bran didn't stop. New houses were needed for new refugees. Building in winter is harder. The mortar freezes. The wood is wet. But Bran had already learned the ropes. A stone foundation. A wooden frame. Walls made of double planks with clay in between. A 3-layer roof. Warm. Bran had become a master, not by Daniel's appointment, but in fact. His crew had grown to 12 carpenters. He commanded them and 4 skeleton assistants with a confidence he hadn't possessed just 3 months ago. He no longer yelled at the skeletons. He would gesture, and then Eric would run to Daniel and relay what was needed. Daniel would send a mental command. The system was clunky, but it worked. Lydia. She had changed over the past month. Not abruptly, slowly, bit by bit. She welcomed the refugees at the gate. She greeted them. She reassured them. She found them places to stay. The women went to her as if she were one of their own. She spoke to them quietly, patiently, without judgment. She didn't mention the skeletons. She didn't defend them. She didn't condemn them. She simply didn't talk about them, as if they weren't there. But one evening she came to Daniel, the Baron. Marfa has 3 children and a cold house. There are cracks in the walls. They can be insulated. Daniel nodded. In the morning, the skeletons patched the cracks with clay and straw. Lydia stood nearby and watched. The skeletons worked in silence, carefully. They finished in an hour. Then they left. Lydia watched them leave. Then she turned and went back to her room. She didn't say a word, but she had asked the skeletons for help, for the first time. Daniel noted this in his mind, not in his notebook. There are some things you don't write down in tables. The mill. Daniel had been building the mill for 2 months. Not a windmill, a water mill. The stream east of the village provided enough flow. Soyeon hadn't arrived yet. Daniel designed it himself, from memory, from fragments of knowledge. A water wheel. Millstones made of granite that the skeletons had hauled from the river. A wooden frame. A system of gears. Bran grumbled. Gears? What are those? Daniel drew with charcoal on a board. A circle with teeth. A second circle with teeth. They mesh. One turns. The second one too. Bran watched. Then he nodded. Done. Crooked. The first time the millstones jammed after an hour. Martin turned new gears out of iron. Better. The second time, the mill ran for 3 hours. Then the axle cracked. Bran replaced it. The third time, the mill started up and didn't stop. Martha stood nearby. She watched as the grain poured into the millstones and came out as flour. White. Soft. Not that gray dust she'd been pounding in the mortar for 3 years. She looked at her hands. Red. Cracked. Calloused from the mortar. Then at the flour. Then she began to cry. Quietly. She turned away. She walked off. Daniel stood nearby and made a note in his notebook. Expand the mill. A second millstone. Need capacity for 700 people. The current one only handles 300. That was his way of caring. Through infrastructure. Through the system. Through notes in his notebook. He didn't know how to comfort. Didn't know how to say the right words. But he knew how to build a mill so that a woman would no longer rub her hands raw until they bled. Midwinter. Epiphany frost. The coldest night of the year. Daniel woke to a knock. Eric. My lord, a wagon train. Refugees, many of them. Daniel went outside. Night. A blizzard. The wind knocked him off his feet. The temperature was so low that a spit would freeze midair. Shadows stood at the gate. 40 people, maybe more. Dark figures in a veil of snow. Among them were children, little ones. Some carried them in their arms. Others dragged them along behind them. The living peasants of Hellsgard were asleep. Wake them all up. An hour, maybe more. An hour in this kind of cold means frostbite. It means amputation. It means death for the children. Daniel didn't wake them. He went to the reserve warehouse. Over the course of 3 months, he'd built up a stockpile. 40 disassembled skeletons, bones in crates, monocapsules ready, an emergency reserve. For an emergency. This is an emergency. He stood in the center of the warehouse. He closed his eyes. He stretched. 80 points flared up in his mind simultaneously, 50 active ones and another 30 from the reserve. A pain pierced his head. White. Hot. He clenched his teeth and held on. 30 skeletons assembled in 3 minutes. The clicking of bones and the silence of the warehouse sounded like hail on the roof. Daniel opened his eyes. Blood was running from his nose. He wiped it away with his sleeve. Forward. The skeletons moved out. 30 figures stepped out into the blitter. Daniel gave orders one after another. 10 to the wagon train. Pick up the children. Carry them to the bakery. There's an oven there. It's warm there. 5 to the empty houses. Light the stoves. Firewood is in the warehouse. 5 to the warehouse for blankets. Carry them to the houses. 5 to line up along the street with torches. Light the way. The wagon train couldn't see where to go. 5 to stay at the gate. Help those who can't walk. The skeletons obeyed, precisely, quickly, without hesitation. The children screamed as bony hands lifted them up. Then they stopped screaming, because the bony hands were carrying them to warmth. One woman fainted at the gate. 2 skeletons picked her up and carried her to the bakery. A man followed behind them, weeping, not out of fear, out of exhaustion. They had been walking for 3 days in the freezing cold. By morning, everyone was inside, fed, warmed up, assigned to homes. Gustav had been baking bread all night. Lydia woke up on her own, without being called. She came to the bakery. She saw the children. She saw the skeletons standing along the walls with torches. They provided light. They provided warmth. She froze on the threshold. She stood and watched. Then she went inside. She picked up a girl of about 3 with frostbitten fingers. She held her close. She began to rub the girl's hands. The girl was crying. Lydia whispered something to her. A prayer, perhaps. A skeleton stood nearby holding a blanket. Waiting. Lydia looked at him, at his empty skull, at the outstretched blanket. She took the blanket and wrapped the girl in it. She said nothing. In the morning, one of the refugees approached Daniel, a soldier, disabled. His left leg was a wooden prosthesis. His face was weather-beaten. His eyes were red from the cold and tears. Spring arrived wet and muddy. The snow took weeks to melt. Streams burst their banks. The drainage ditches that the skeletons had dug in the fall saved the fields from flooding. Without them, everything would have been submerged. Jorgen stood at the edge of the field and watched the water flow into the ditches smoothly and quickly. He shook his head. My lord knew. He knew there would be a flood. Jorgen didn't know. He guessed. But he guessed correctly. The 8th month. Helsgard's population had surpassed 1,000. 300 more people arrived in the winter. Despite the frost, despite the blizzards, the rumor about the Baron who takes everyone in proved stronger than any blizzard. People came. With children. With sacks on their backs. With nothing. Daniel welcomed everyone. 3 questions. Name. Where from? What can you do? Tobias took down the answers. The book had grown to 3 volumes. Eric ran back and forth between the plots like a shuttle. He was 15. He'd grown 2 fingers over the winter. His voice was starting to crack. But his energy hadn't waned. Spring meant a new planting season. There were now 70 skeletons. Daniel had learned to handle more. Practice. 2 hours of service every day stretched his capacity like a muscle. 70 points in his mind. Each one glows evenly. Under control. He assigned them according to a new schedule. 30 plowman skeletons to the fields. 10 diggers to expand the drainage system. 10 stonemason skeletons at the quarry. 10 builder skeletons in Brand's crew. 5 lumberjack skeletons. 5 skeleton porters for logistics between the plots. Each type in its place. Each performing a single task, an assembly line. In Iowa, this was called job specialization. Here they called it witchcraft. New fields. 400 hectares for wheat, 200 for barley, 100 for oats, 50 for clover. Not clover for food, clover for plowing. Nitrogen into the soil, crop rotation. Daniel explained it to Jorgen. You plant rye 3 years in a row in the same field. The soil gets depleted. It loses its fertility. You have to rotate the crops. First year rye, second year clover. Plow it under. Third year wheat, fourth year barley, fifth year clover again, and so on in a cycle. Jorgen listened. He furrowed his brow. My father planted rye every year, and his father, and his. Daniel nodded. And with each generation the harvest was a little smaller. That's right. Jorgen was silent for a moment. That's right. Not anymore. Jorgen looked out at the fields where skeletons were already pulling the plows. Straight furrows, one after another. Then he looked at Daniel. He nodded. He didn't argue. He'd stopped arguing 2 months ago, not because he'd given up, but because he'd seen the result. The 8th month brought yet another important person, Ariel Vance. She appeared the way all fugitives do, suddenly, without warning. In the morning, a girl of about 20 was standing at the gate. Thin, dirty. Her clothes were torn. Her hair was tangled. On her shoulder was a bruise the size of a palm. She stood there looking at Hellsgard with the expression of someone who had been running for a very long time and had finally stopped. Jorgen approached. Where are you from? She didn't answer. She stared at the skeletons in the field. Then she raised her hand. A gust of wind blew. Not an ordinary one, a directed one. Sharp. It knocked Jorgen's hat off his head and whipped up dust at his feet. Jorgen flinched. The girl lowered her hand. I'm a mage. An air mage. A runaway student from the Royal Academy. They're after me. Give me 3 days rest and I'll leave. Jorgen led her to Daniel. Daniel was sitting at the table, checking Maylin's calculations for the spring caravan. He looked up. He looked at the girl. At the bruise. At her torn clothes. At her eyes. Angry. Frightened. Proud. All at once. What's your name? Ariel Vance. I'll be leaving in 3 days. I just need... Sit down. Ariel blinked. What? Sit down. Eat. Then we'll talk. Henrik brought bread and porridge. Ariel ate greedily. She choked. She hadn't eaten for at least 3 days. Daniel waited. When she finished, he asked, Who's after you? People from the academy. Hunters. I ran away 4 months ago. They don't let students leave. The contract lasts until you're 25. I'm 20. Why did you run away? Ariel clenched her jaw. They were breaking us. They made us fly until we passed out. They punished us for failures. They called us a disgrace to our lineage. I put up with it for 3 years. Then I stopped. Daniel looked at her. He'd seen this in Iowa. Not at the Magic Academy, at a meat processing plant. Young workers were driven to the point of fainting. 90% turnover in the first year. A system that grinds people down and spits them out. Different surroundings. Same pattern. Ariel, you're not leaving in 3 days. She looked up. What? You're staying. If you want to. I have a job for you. What kind of job? Reconnaissance. You're an air elemental. You can see farther than any watchman in a tower. You sense the weather. You can dry grain with the wind on 10 threshing floors at once. You can warn of rain an hour in advance. Ariel looked at him. She was used to narcissistic mages who measured their worth by the power of their spells. Daniel wasn't measuring himself that way. He was offering her a job, a position, a room, respect. Not for her pretty eyes, for her skill. And the hunters from the academy? Let them come. They'll see a necromancer with 70 skeletons, 1,000 people behind him, and an air mage who works instead of running around. We'll see who ends up hunting whom. Ariel was silent for 10 seconds. Then she sat back down. Henrik, some more porridge, please. She stayed. The first few days, she kept to herself. She slept in an empty room in the tower. She went out onto the roof. She stood in the wind for hours. She gazed at the horizon. She waited for the hunters. They didn't come. Not after a week. Not after 2. Ariel began to relax. Just a little. By the 3rd week, she asked for a task. Daniel sent her to scout the surroundings. She rose on a wind current to a height of 100 meters. She hovered. She looked around. She returned an hour later. In her mind was a map. Precise. Detailed. Every hill, every stream, every road. The borders of the cursed forest. distances. She drew from memory, and Tobias took notes. Daniel looked at the map and realized he had acquired a priceless resource. In Iowa, they called it satellite monitoring. Here, it was a 20-year-old girl with the gift of the air and a photographic memory. Ariel began making flyovers every morning. 40 minutes in the air, a complete survey of the territory within a 20-kilometer radius. She saw everything: convoys on the roads, movement along the Margraviate's borders, herds of wild animals near the forest, weather fronts on the horizon. She warned of the spring hailstorm 3 hours before it struck. Daniel managed to cover the seedling beds with burlap. Without her, they would have lost a third of their crops. After that, Ariel smiled for the first time. "I'm useful." Daniel looked at her. "You're feeding 1,000 people, Ariel. They didn't break you. They just taught you the wrong things." She fell silent. Her face twitched. Then she turned and walked away. Eric said later that he'd seen her in the stable. She was sitting against the wall, crying. For a long time. In the morning, she returned to her post. Her eyes were red, but her back was straight. The 9th month. The first inquisitor from Father Cassian. Daniel had been expecting this. He was surprised it took so long. The inquisitor arrived on horseback, alone, a young man of about 30 in the gray robes of the Church of Light. His name was Brother Edmund. His face was calm. His eyes were attentive. He dismounted at the gate. He looked around. He saw the fields. He saw the skeletons. He saw the houses, the bakery, the blacksmith shop, a mill. He saw children running down the street. He saw Lydia carrying a basket of bread. His expression did not change. No surprise, no horror. The 10th month, first blood. Mei Lin was returning from her spring journey south. 2 convoys, 6 wagons. Cargo on the return trip: cloth, iron, tools, flax seeds, salt. They were waiting for her at the pass. 20 men, not bandits, mercenaries, good weapons, chainmail. A commander whose coat of arms Mei Lin didn't recognize, but she knew who was paying. They blocked the road. Mei Lin stopped the convoy. She looked at the mercenaries. She looked at the 4 skeletons on the roofs of the wagons. Skeletons with axes are good for intimidation. Against 20 professionals, they're nothing. The commander rode up. "Girl, turn the caravan around. There's no road." Mei Lin narrowed her eyes. "This is a public road. By royal law, the pass is open to trade." The commander smirked. "The law applies in the city. Out here, I am the law. Turn around, or my men will chop your wagons up for firewood." Mei Lin was many things, but she wasn't a fool. She turned the caravan around. She took the long way, through Mervale. She lost 3 days. At the gates of Mervale, they fleeced her for a toll, a third of her cargo. She arrived in Hellsgard as angry as a hornet, with 2/3 of her goods. With a bruise on her cheek from a guard who decided to check what was under the cloth. Daniel listened in silence. The pass is blocked. Mercenaries. The Margrave. He looked at the map Ariel had drawn from memory while flying overhead. 2 routes. The southern one through the pass. The western one through Mervale. The pass is blocked. Mervale costs a third of the cargo. There's a third route. Ariel pointed it out. To the east, through the edge of the cursed forest. The road has been abandoned for 200 years, but it exists. An old stone road through the forest, built even before the war with the undead. Daniel thought, the cursed forest. Dangerous. No one knows what's inside, but the road exists. And it leads to the eastern markets, bypassing both the pass and Mervale. He put that thought aside. Not now. Something else first. Ralph. The instructor approached. 3 months of training, 23 marksmen. How are they? Ralph thought. 10 shoot decently, 5 shoot well, 2 are excellent. The rest need another month. I need more men. How many? 200. 200. Daniel looked at him. Ralph nodded. The Margrave won't stop at the bandits, my lord. He'll come here. With an army. I've seen men like that. I know what will happen next. When? Not soon. He needs a pretext, but he'll find one. Daniel nodded. 200 archers. Recruit them from volunteers. Train them. Every day. Ralph was given a training ground. Martin forged arrowheads nonstop. Bran made bows. Better than the old ones. Stronger. He'd learned the ropes. There were more than 200 volunteers. 253. Men and women. The oldest was 50. A young man named Klaus, a former hunter from the Eastern Duchy. He shot so well that Ralph whistled in admiration. A woman named Gertrude, a soldier's widow. Her hands were strong from hard work. In 2 weeks, she learned to shoot better than half the men. Daniel wasn't surprised. In Iowa, the best shooter at the county competitions was a farmer's wife from Des Moines, 62 years old. She shot from a height of the age of 17. Training took place every day, morning and evening. Ralph pushed them hard, but fairly, not like at Ariel's academy. No humiliation, no hazing, with explanations. Ariel watched the training sessions from above. She hung in the wind current and watched. Once she came down. She approached Ralph. I can help. How? The wind. I can show them how the wind affects the arrow. Practically. Ralph looked at her, then at Daniel. Daniel nodded. Ariel stood next to the archer's line. She raised her hand. Crosswind. Light. The arrows veered to the left. The archers saw it clearly. She varied the strength and direction. The archers learned how to adjust their aim. Within a week, their accuracy had doubled. Ralph grunted. A useful witch. Ariel gave him the finger. Then she smirked. The first skirmish took place at night, the 10th month, 3 weeks after the pass was blocked. Ariel spotted movement to the northwest during her evening reconnaissance flight. 30 horsemen. They were heading toward Helgard without torches. No flags. At night. She ran down. My lord, cavalry, 30. No identifying marks. They'll be here in 2 hours. Daniel didn't panic. He'd been preparing for this. Ralph. Battle alert. Ralph whistled. 200 archers took up positions along the earthen rampart that the skeletons had built a month ago around the perimeter of the village. Not very high, half a meter, but you could lie down behind it and shoot. Daniel called up another 20 skeletons from reserve. A total of 90 took the field. He lined up 50 skeletons in a row in front of the rampart, with shields. Wooden shields that Bran had been making for the past month. Not for attack, for a wall. The skeletons stood shoulder to shoulder, shields forward. A wall of the dead between the cavalry and the village. The cavalry approached around midnight. They stopped. They saw the line of skeletons. They saw the archers behind the rampart. They saw Daniel on the tower with a torch. He stood and looked down. Ariel hung in the air above him. The wind ruffled her hair. Air swirled in her raised hands, ready to strike. The horsemen stood still. A minute. 2. 3. Then the commander turned his horse around. They rode off. Without a single shot fired, Ralph lowered his bow. My lord, that was a test. Daniel nodded. I know. Next time it won't be 30. Next time it'll be 300. Ralph nodded. We're not ready for 300. I know, but we have time. How much? The Margrave needs a pretext. A pretext to justify the campaign before the crown. An attack without a pretext is treason. He won't risk treason. He'll find a legitimate way, and that will give us time. Ralph looked at him. You're thinking like a general, my lord. I think like a manager, Ralph. It's the same thing. Except that with a commander, people die. With a manager, they don't. I prefer the second option. Ralph smirked. For the first time. Over the next few weeks, Daniel strengthened the defenses. The earthen ramparts grew taller, 1 meter, 1.5. The skeletons worked around the clock. In front of the ramparts was a moat, shallow but wide. Cavalry couldn't jump over it. Behind the ramparts were positions for archers, every 20 paces, with stone cover. Martin forged arrowheads by the hundreds. Bran made shields. Ralph trained the men. Year 1. Population, 2,500. Daniel stood on the roof of the tower and looked out over the city. Not a village, a city. Hellsgard was no longer just a cluster of houses near the ruins. 4 streets. a central square, a market, 2 smithies. The bakery had been expanded to twice its size. A spinning mill, a weaving workshop, a carpentry shop, a school for scribes. Yes, a school. Tobias was teaching 12 teenagers to read, write, and count. Eric was his assistant, and his best student. The boy who, a year ago, had been drawing dots with ink was now keeping his own ledger of warehouse inventory. Daniel looked at all this and thought that back in Iowa, Eric would have made an excellent logistics specialist. Here, he'd become something greater. Because here, he's one of a kind. Soyeon Han arrived at the start of the first year, quietly, without drama. A 27-year-old woman, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were precise. Her gaze was appraising. She was carrying a bundle on her back. When she unwrapped it, it turned out to be drafting tools. A ruler, a set square, a compass, a set of pens. An architect. From the ruined Eastern Duchy. Her husband, an engineer, had died in the burning town hall that he himself had built. The city was burned down by Valen's troops. She had been walking for 2 months. Daniel sat her down at the table. 3 questions. Name. Where are you from? What can you do? She answered. Then she took out the drafting tools and in 10 minutes drew a plan of Helgard, just as it is now, with the errors she had spotted in the layout, with notes indicating where the sewage system would contaminate the well if the cesspools weren't relocated, with the roof angles calculated for snow load. Daniel looked at the drawing, then at Soyeon. Then he took out his notebook. He opened it to the page where he'd sketched a rough plan for the town's expansion in crooked lines with mistakes and showed it to her. Soyeon looked at it and raised an eyebrow. The idea is right, but the execution isn't. The sewer can't run parallel to the water main. The slope isn't steep enough. And why did you place the barn facing north? The wind carries dampness from the forest. The barn should face south. Daniel smiled. For the first time, someone had pointed out a mistake in his planning, and it was a relief rather than an offense. You're staying, as Helsgard's chief architect. Soyeon looked at him calmly, without agitation. The conditions. I need an office, a desk, light, paper, and I don't want anyone touching my blueprints. Will do. And one more thing. I smoke a pipe. If that's a problem, tell me right away. Not a problem. She nodded. She took out her pipe, filled it with southern tobacco, lit it. The smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Daniel and Soyeon were sitting at the table. He was showing her his notes. She was showing him her blueprints. An hour later, they realized they were thinking alike. Systems, flows, connections between elements. He saw the city as a farm. She saw the city as a mechanism. Different metaphors. The same logic. They drank tea. They discussed the sewer system, where to run the pipes, what slope to use, what material, clay or wood. Clay lasts longer but is more expensive to produce. Wood is faster but rots in 5 years. Soyeon proposed a compromise. Clay pipes on the main lines, wooden ones on the secondary lines. Replace the wooden ones in 3 years, when there would be sufficient capacity for a fully clay network. Daniel nodded. A 3-year plan. He hadn't heard those words in a long time. They sat there until dawn. Then Soyeon stood up. She went to her designated office. By morning, the first blueprint lay on her desk. Helsgard Town Hall. Stone. 2 stories. With a large assembly hall. With an archive. With a courtroom. She had designed it in a single night. Daniel looked at the blueprint that morning, then at Soyeon. She was standing nearby, waiting. Her face was impassive, but her hands were trembling slightly. Soyeon, I want this building to outlive me and you and this whole court of skeletons. Design it so that it stands for 300 years. And I'll find a way to make sure no one sets it on fire. She looked at him, for a long time. Then, for the first time in 2 years, she smiled. Just a little, at the corners of her lips. 300 years. That's a serious technical challenge, Baron. I'm a serious client. She nodded. She took the blueprint. She went to revise it. Deeper foundations, thicker walls, a different kind of stone. 300 years. Construction of the town hall began a month later. 100 skeletons. Daniel managed to reach 100. His head ached every evening. 100 points of consciousness is the limit. Absolute. Beyond that, only if he finds a way to boost his mana reserve. But 100 skeletons is a force to be reckoned with. 40 in the fields, 20 at the construction site, 15 at the quarry, 10 in logistics, 10 in logging, 5 in reserve. City Hall was growing, stone by stone. Soyeon stood on the construction site and gave orders. Silently, with gestures, Daniel relayed the commands to the skeletons. Bran worked alongside the living crew, 20 carpenters. They were installing floor joists and the roof. The skeletons hauled stone and mortar. The living did the light work. The dead did the heavy lifting. Division of labor, a system. The city grew. Soyeon designed the streets. Straight, with gutters. With spaces for garbage pits, with residential and industrial zones separated. Forges and workshops on the east side. Residential buildings on the west. The market in the center. A school next to City Hall. A chapel. Yes, Daniel was building the chapel of light. With skeletons, made of white stone, which the skeletons hauled from a distant quarry 2 days' journey away. White, pure, with veins of quartz that glistened in the sun. Jorgen looked at the construction site and shook his head. My lord, a necromancer is building a temple of light. With the dead. That's irony, Jorgen. The old man grunted. Lydia didn't know. Daniel hadn't told her. He wanted her to see it when it was finished. The chapel had been built in 3 weeks. Small, stone walls, arched windows, a wooden roof. Inside, benches made of light-colored wood, an altar made of the same white stone. The acoustics turned out to be perfect by chance. Soyeon had calculated the room's proportions using a principle she'd learned in college. Sound in the chapel echoed softly and clearly. A whisper at the altar could be heard all the way at the door. Daniel had brought Lydia there that morning. She followed him, not knowing where they were going. He stopped in front of the door. The white stone glistened in the sun. Lydia looked up. She froze. Her mouth fell open slightly. She stood there and looked. At the white walls. At the arches. At the cross above the door that Martin had forged from iron. This. The chapel. For you, Lydia. Your father taught you that light is care. There is a lot of care here. Let there be a place for it too. Lydia went inside. Slowly. She ran her hand along the wall, along the pews. She approached the altar. She stood there. She was silent. Then her shoulders began to shake. She was crying. For the first time in a year. Not out of grief, out of something greater than grief and greater than joy. Because the man she had considered cursed had built a home for her faith, with his own dead, out of white stone. Daniel stood by the door. He was silent. He waited. Then he quietly left. He closed the door behind him. He returned to the tower. He opened his notebook. He wrote, Chapel. Status, complete. Person in charge, Lydia O'Tree. Supplies. Candles. Scriptures. Order 1 copy through Maylin. War came at the end of the 14th month. Daniel knew it would come. He didn't know when. Now he knew. Ariel spotted movement 3 days ago. An army. Not 30 horsemen. Not 100. 800 soldiers. 300 mounted. 500 on foot. A supply train. Siege ladders. Margrave Osgood Valentine was marching on Hellsguard in person. A pretext had been found. A report to the capital. Baron Asher is practicing forbidden necromancy on an industrial scale. He threatens order and the faith. The church backed it. Father Cassian wrote an episcopal letter. The king did not approve of the campaign. But he did not forbid it either. He remained silent. In Astorn, silence from the crown meant consent. Valentine took this as permission. 3 days. Daniel had 3 days. He stood on the tower and looked at the map. Ariel hovered in the air and reported. The column is traveling along the western road. Speed, 20 kilometers a day. Arrival in 2 days. Maybe 3 if it rains. Daniel was calculating. 200 trained archers, 100 skeletons. Earthen ramparts around the city. A moat. Arrow supplies. 2,000 Martin arrowheads. Water supply. 10 days' worth of food for a siege. Against 800 professional soldiers with siege ladders and cavalry. The math was bad. Very bad. Daniel closed his eyes. Back in Iowa, when the numbers didn't add up, he'd look for the variable everyone had overlooked. A hidden resource. An unconventional solution. What do I have that Valentine doesn't? Skeletons that never sleep. They work at night. They build at night. They dig at night. Valentine has been marching for 3 days. 3 nights. 3 nights of non-stop work by 100 skeletons. That's a lot of earthwork. Daniel opened his eyes. He called out to Soyan. I need 3 lines of fortifications. 1 per night. 3 nights. 3 lines. Soyan looked at him. She did the math in her head. She set the phone down on the table. It's possible. If all 100 skeletons are on the digging detail, all 100, the fields can wait. Tell me what you want. Daniel explained. The first line, a false wall. An earthen rampart as tall as a man, wide. It looks like the main fortification. Nothing behind it. Empty. The second line, 100 paces behind it, a real rampart, lower, but with a moat in front of it. Deep. Positions for archers, stone shelters. Third line, another 100 paces. The final line of defense, a wall of stone and earth, tall. Behind it lies the city. Between the second and third lines, an open field, exposed to crossfire. Anyone who breaks through the first and second lines will find themselves in the open, caught in crossfire. Soyan listened. She sketched. She was counting. Perhaps. The skeletons began working that very night. 100 skeletons. 24 hours without a break. The first night. A false wall had risen by dawn. 2 meters high. 300 meters long. With loopholes. With wooden shields on top. It looked imposing. Behind it lay emptiness, like a backdrop. The second night. A real rampart. A moat. Trenches. Stone. The skeletons hauled stone from the quarry at a run. If you could call it running. A quick mechanical stride. All night long. The clatter of bones and stone in the darkness. Ralph's sentries slept in shifts. Half at their posts, half resting. Ralph didn't sleep at all. He walked along the lines. Checking. The third night. The final wall. Tall. A stone foundation. An earthen embankment. Beyond it, the city. Beyond it, the children. Beyond it, Lydia with her brothers in the tower's basement. Beyond it, Gustav in the bakery, who baked bread for the guards. Beyond it, Tobias with the ledgers pressed to his chest. On the morning of the third day, Daniel stood on the tower. He looked at his fortifications. 3 lines. Soyan stood beside him. She was smoking. It's rough work. If I'd had 2 weeks instead of 3 nights, I could have done better. Soyan, it's perfect. She looked at him. She snorted. Far from perfect, but it'll do for 3 nights. The Margrave's army appeared on the horizon after noon. Ariel spotted them first. I see them. Cavalry in the lead, infantry behind them, the supply train in the rear. They're turning around. They're going to set up camp. So not today, tomorrow. The night passed in silence. Hellsguard didn't sleep. Lights in the windows. Children in the tower's basement. Skeletons stood along the walls. Silent. Waiting. Dawn. Fog. Wallenheim's army was lined up on the field before Hellsguard. 800 men in chainmail and helmets. Cavalry on the flanks. Infantry in the center. Siege ladders up front. The Margrave sat on horseback behind the ranks. In full armor. With a flag. Handsome. Formidable. Commanding. A herald rode forward. Baron Asher. Margrave Osgood Valentine demands the surrender of the castle and the barony. For the practice of forbidden necromancy. For refusal to pay taxes. For harboring deserters and fugitives. Surrender and spare your lives. Daniel stood on the tower. Ariel beside him. Ralph behind him. Below, 200 archers behind the second line. 100 skeletons along all 3 lines. Mei Lin was with the supply wagon. Soyan was at the third wall with the evacuation plan. Lydia was in the cellar with the children. Jorgen was in the square with a militia of old men and teenagers. Martin was in the smithy. He was sharpening swords right up until the last minute. Daniel was silent for 10 seconds. Then he replied. His voice was steady. Necromancy is not prohibited in a storm. Surrender to the Margraviate is not provided for by law. There are no deserters in Hellsgard. There are free citizens. Tell the Margrave, I will not surrender. The herald has left. Pause. Then the horn sounded. Attack! The infantry moved forward toward the first wall, toward the false wall. They advanced in formation, shields raised. The ladders were pushed forward. Daniel waited. Let them come. The first wall is a decoy. Let them waste their strength storming empty space. The infantry reached the wall. They began to scale it. The ladders were set up. The soldiers scrambled up. They climbed over the top. They fell to the other side and saw an empty field. Nothing. Nothing beyond the wall. Just flat ground and a second wall 100 paces ahead. They stood there, bewildered. Daniel watched from the tower, though he didn't have binoculars. But Ariel could see from above and reported back. They had climbed over. They're standing there, confused. Now, Ralph. Archers from the second line. Fire. 200 bows sang out at once. Arrows rained down, over the false wall. At the Margrave's soldiers standing in the open space between the first and second lines. The first volley took down 30 men. The second, another 20. The soldiers ran back. Through the wall, into their own ranks. Chaos. Wallenheim's cavalry tried to flank them. Daniel had been expecting this. Skeletons. The left flank. 30 skeletons emerged from behind the left side of the second wall, with long spears. They formed a line. Spears forward. Horses won't charge into spears. Horses are smarter than their riders. The cavalry stopped. Right flank. Same thing. 30 skeletons. Spears. A wall. The cavalry didn't get through. Valentine sent in a second wave of infantry, over the false wall, up the second rampart, with ladders. They reached the moat. The moat turned out to be deeper than it looked. 1.5 meters, with water, with stakes at the bottom. Not lethal, but enough to slow them down. The soldiers scrambled across the moat. Wet, heavy, slow. Ralph's archers fired point blank. 10 paces, impossible to miss. Ralph shouted commands, steady, precise, just like in training. Valentine sent in a third wave, and a fourth. Each one was shattered against the moat, against the archers, against the skeletons with spears. By evening, the Margrave had lost 200 men, killed and wounded. Hellsgard lost 100. 3 killed, 8 wounded. Daniel learned the name of every man who had fallen. Mark, a farmer from the Eastern Duchy, 32 years old, left behind a wife and daughter. Heinz, a former fisherman, 27 years old, single. He had come to Hellsgard 3 months ago. Agnes, Martin's wife, 41 years old. She had been standing in the third line with a crossbow, a stray arrow. Martin found out an hour later. He dropped his hammer. He walked out of the smithy. He sat down on the ground by the wall. He sat there until morning. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there. Daniel approached him at dawn. He sat down beside him. He was silent. Martin looked at him. His eyes were empty. Build her a stone, my lord. A good stone. A white one. I'll build it. Martin nodded. He stood up. He went into the smithy. He lit the forge. He began to forge. Because a blacksmith forges. Even when the world has fallen apart. Valentine hadn't left. He led his troops away and set up Camp 3. A siege. Daniel stood on the tower and counted. 800 minus 200. 600. The Margrave still has 600. The supply train. Provisions. He can hold out for a month. But Daniel can't. Grain, of course. Water from the wells. But the trade routes are cut off. No resupply. 10 days' worth of provisions for 2,500. Then starvation. This needs to be ended quickly. At night. The second night of the siege. The skeletons don't sleep. Daniel sent 40 skeletons on a flanking maneuver through the cursed forest. At night, without torches. The skeletons don't need light. They moved silently. Through the black trees. Through the dark grass. They emerged behind Valentine's camp. At the supply train. 40 skeletons with axes attacked the supply train at 3 in the morning. The supply train's guards. 20 men. They were awakened by the clatter of bones. They saw the skeletons. In the darkness. Among the wagons. With axes. 12 ran without looking back. 8 put up a fight. The skeletons didn't kill them. Daniel gave the order. Chop up the wagons. Chop up the sacks. Chop up the barrels, not the people. But in the dark, the difference is imperceptible. 8 guards fled a minute later. The skeletons destroyed the wagon train in an hour. Grain on the ground, barrels split open, wagons in splinters. Then they went back through the forest. In the morning, Valentine saw his wagon train, grain in the mud, water in puddles, 3 days' worth of supplies, instead of a month's. He stood in the midst of the devastation, his face ashen. Not from fear, from rage. He couldn't believe that a boy necromancer had outmaneuvered him, through the forest, at night, with skeletons. It was an insult, both military and personal. Valentine convened a council. The commanders suggested retreating. Without supplies, a siege was impossible. Valentine refused. He demanded an assault, a final one, with all available forces. The commanders exchanged glances. One objected. The Margrave struck him across the face with his gauntlet. The assault never took place, because on the morning of the 3rd day, a horseman bearing the royal standard appeared on the horizon, a messenger, with an order from the crown, to Margrave Osgood Valentine. After Valentine's retreat, Helsgard did not celebrate. Daniel would not allow it. 3 graves in the new cemetery, white stones. Martin forged the cross for Agnes himself. He stood alone by the grave. His sons were beside him, 7 and 10 years old. The younger one held the older one's hand and didn't cry. He had already forgotten how. Daniel stood to the side. He watched. He was taking notes in his head, not in a notebook. 3 people, 3 names, the price of his decisions. In Iowa, when a worker died on a farm after a tractor overturned, an investigation was conducted. A report was written. Protocols were changed. Here, too, the protocols need to be changed. The 3rd line of defense was weak. The shooters were too exposed. Agnes stood without cover. A stray arrow. An accident. But an accident that could have been prevented. Daniel called out to Soyon. I need stone shelters on the 3rd line, full height, with embrasures, so the shooter can fire while being covered up to the chest. Soyon nodded. A week later, the blueprints on the table. 2 weeks later, the skeletons were building them. Helgard was licking its wounds and growing at the same time. Because the refugees didn't stop. They kept coming. The war with Valentine hadn't deterred them. On the contrary, a baron who had defeated the Margrave, a baron whom the crown had protected. That sounded like safety. People were flocking to safety. By the end of the 15th month, the population was 3,000. Tobias conducted the census. 3 volumes. Every person. Name, age, skill, house, plot, family. Eric helped. He was 16. He had grown another 3 fingers. His voice had broken completely. Now it was a bass. Strange for a thin, lanky teenager, but confident. Eric no longer ran between plots. He kept track of the warehouse inventory. By himself, unsupervised. Daniel checked his books once a week. There were no mistakes. A month after the siege, Catherine Lawrence arrived in Helsgard, an inspector with the royal treasury. The youngest daughter of an impoverished noble family, 30 years old. Her face was stern. Her clothes were travel attire but neat. Her hair was tucked under a simple bonnet. She carried a leather briefcase stuffed with documents and was accompanied by 2 royal guards. She dismounted at the gate. She looked around. She saw the city, the streets, the town hall, already standing in all its glory, the white stone chapel, the market where 3 dozen stalls were doing business, skeletons in the distant field. Her expression did not change. No surprise, no fear, only assessment. She had come with a warrant for a full audit. Daniel met her at City Hall, in the Assembly Hall, at a large table. Ms. Lawrence, welcome to Helsgard. The audit books were on the table, all 3 volumes. The trade records were with Mei Lin. The inventory records were with Eric.
The construction records are with Soyeon.
The land records are with Jorgen. What would you like to see first? Catherine looked at him, then at the books, then back at him. Usually those being audited hide the books, or lose them, or claim there are no records. You're the first one to lay everything out yourself. I have nothing to hide, Dr. Lawrence. She blinked, barely noticeably. Doctor? He called her doctor. No one outside the university had ever called her that. You know about my degree. Mei Lin found out. She finds out everything. Catherine sat down at the table. She opened the first volume. She began to read. She read for 3 days, from morning until night. Daniel didn't interrupt. He brought tea. Henrik brought food. Catherine ate without looking up from the books. On the second day, she summoned Tobias. She asked questions. Tobias answered, precisely, without a hitch. He knew every figure. On the third day, she summoned Mei Lin. Trade records, routes, prices, contracts. Mei Lin answered curtly and precisely, figure by figure. Catherine checked, cross-referenced, recalculated. On the fourth day, she went to see Daniel. Baron Asher, your books are in order. Your annual tax revenue exceeds that of any barony in the region. In fact, it exceeds that of the Margraviate of Mervale. Daniel nodded. I know. You know. Of course. That's exactly why Mei Lin sent copies to the treasury. Catherine looked at him, intently. You manipulated the crown. I informed the crown. There's a significant difference. Catherine was silent for a moment. Then she smiled ever so slightly, for the first time in 4 days. You're right. There's a significant difference. She stayed for a week, then for 2. Then Daniel realized she wasn't leaving. Catherine walked around Helgard. She looked around. She took stock. She asked questions. Jorgen about the harvest. Soyeon about the sewer system. Martin about the blacksmith shop. Ralph about the police. Ariel about aerial reconnaissance. She saw the system, just like Mei Lin, just like Soyeon, only from a different perspective, not as a merchant or an architect, as a lawyer. She saw the legal framework, and she saw the loopholes in it. Baron, your status isn't protected. A barony under direct vassalage is an old law. Valentine will challenge it in court. Not today. In a year, when he's gathered his allies. And the church council might ban necromancy in 2 years. Then everything you've built will collapse within a month. Daniel looked at her. He knew. He thought about it every day. And what do you propose? Free city status. By royal edict. Direct subordination to the crown. Its own charter. The right to self-governance. The right to its own police force. The right to trade without intermediaries. And the key point. The right to use any magic approved by the crown. If the crown officially approves your necromancy, the cathedral won't be able to ban it in your city. A precedent. Daniel looked at her. 5 seconds? 10. You can pull this off. Catherine lifted her chin. I have a doctorate in fiscal law, Baron. I defended my dissertation before a room full of men who laughed openly at me. I can pull off anything. Daniel held out his hand. Catherine shook it, firmly. The work began. Catherine wrote. Days and nights. Legal documents. Petitions. Justifications. Precedents. References to old laws that no one remembered. Daniel helped. With numbers. Facts. Ledgers. Mei Lin provided trade statistics. Tobias provided the census. Soyeon provided a map of the city. It all came together in a folder as thick as a fist. Catherine sent it via royal courier. 6 weeks later, a reply arrived. A royal edict. Hellsgard was granted the status of a free city under the direct protection of the crown, with the right to practice necromancy for peaceful purposes under special permission, the first such permission in the history of Astorn. Daniel read the edict aloud, and he handed it to Catherine. Read it aloud, in front of everyone. She looked at him. In front of everyone. In front of the Valentine envoys standing at the gates. In front of the 2 royal observers. In front of all of Helgard. And please address me as Dr. Lawrence. Catherine stepped out onto the square. 3,000 people stood and listened. The Valentine envoys stood with stony faces. The royal observers nodded. Catherine read in an even voice, clear and strong. By the end, her wife trembled slightly, just slightly. But she read through to the very last word. The second year. Hellsgard became a city, not just on paper. On paper, it had become a city when Catherine read the edict. It had become a city in essence when Daniel realized he didn't know the names of all the residents.
3,500. He knew the first 1,000. Every single one. By name, by face, by habit. But the second 1,000 had blurred. The third, even more so. He couldn't go to every house, couldn't check every plot of land, couldn't personally solve every problem. The system had outgrown a single person. That was exactly what he wanted, and exactly what he feared. In Iowa, when a farm grew to a certain size, they hired middle managers, foremen, section chiefs, people who make decisions without calling higher-ups. The same was needed here. Daniel convened a council, Hellsgard's first official council. City Hall, the Great Hall, an oak table that Brand had spent a week building. 10 people seated around the table. Daniel, Jorgen, Maylin, Ariel, Soyeon, Catherine, Ralph, Tobias, Lydia, Martin. Daniel looked at them. Every face. Each of them had come from nowhere. Each had found a place here. Each had become irreplaceable. And that was precisely the problem. There shouldn't be anyone irreplaceable. If I die tomorrow. Silence. Everyone looked at him. If I die tomorrow, the skeletons will crumble in a week. 2 at most. Without the skeletons, the plowing will stop. Construction will stop. The quarry will stop. Logistics will stop.
In a month, famine will set in. In 2 months, Hellsgard will be back where it started. 40 people and 2 months' worth of grain. A heavy silence hung in the air. Jorgen clenched his fists on the table. Maylin narrowed her eyes. Ariel frowned. Soyeon smoked and said nothing. Catherine took notes. Lydia looked at Daniel, and for the first time he saw not wariness, but fear in her eyes. Not for herself, for him. I need necromancers. Ariel raised an eyebrow. Where will you find necromancers? Necromancy is passed down through blood. You can count the families of necromancers on one hand, and they're all holed up in the corners, hiding. I'll find them. Maylin, business contacts. Merchants know everything. Who's hiding where? Who's afraid of whom? Find me necromancers who have nowhere to go, who've been cast out, who are about to be burned. Tell them there's a place in Hellsgard, a position, protection, and work. Maylin nodded. She made a note of it. Catherine, legal framework. The right to study necromancy, included in the city charter. Catherine nodded. I'll have a draft ready by next week. Daniel looked at the table, at their faces. And one more thing. The Hellsgard Council. This isn't just a meeting. It's a governing body, with authority. Each of you is responsible for your own area, and makes decisions regarding it without my approval. I can't be everywhere. You can. Silence. Then Jorgen grunted. My lord, you've just given us power. I've given you responsibility, Jorgen. Power is a side effect. The old man shook his head. But he didn't object. The council got to work. Not right away. For the first few weeks, everyone ran to Daniel with every question. He sent them back. That's Maylin's decision. That's Ralph's decision. That's Soyeon's decision. After a month, they got used to it. After 2 months, the system was working. Not perfectly, with some friction, with mistakes. But it worked. Maylin oversaw trade. 3 regular routes. The southern route through the pass. The eastern route through the edge of the forest. The western route through Mervale, where duties had been cut in half after Valentine's fall. The new Margrave was weaker and more accommodating. Valentine had left for the capital to face an inquiry and never returned. He was stripped of his title. Quietly, without fanfare. The crown does not like losers. Soyeon was planning an expansion, new neighborhoods, a water supply from a mountain stream, sewer systems on the main streets, clay pipes. The system worked. The city didn't stink. It was a miracle by Astorn's standards. Ralph trained the militia, 300 riflemen, 100 crossbowmen, 50 spearmen, former soldiers. Not an army, but a force to be reckoned with. Tobias ran the chancellery. The staff consisted of 4 clerks.
All graduates of his school. The first graduating class. 6 people. 4 went to the chancellery. 1 went to Mei Lin's trading post. 1 became Catherine's assistant. The school was thriving. The second class had 20 students. Lydia. She ran the chapel's congregation. 6 women helped her. She took in refugees. She comforted them. She housed them. She prayed. And she kept track of donations to the chapel with a precision that would have made Tobias nervous. The priest's daughter was better at counting than at praying. Or perhaps she prayed while counting. Daniel couldn't tell. Martin was forging. Now he had an apprentice, his eldest son, 10 years old. The boy stood at the anvil, holding the tongs. Martin taught him just as his father had taught him, with a firm hand and patience. His second son attended Tobias's school, where he read, wrote, and did arithmetic. Agnes would have liked to see that. Martin thought about it every day, but he didn't speak. He spoke with his hammer. Daniel found his first necromancer 3 months later. Mei Lin found him, a 16-year-old boy from a southern county. His name was Thomas Gray, an orphan. His mother had been burned as a witch. He never knew his father. The gift manifested when he was 13. He raised a dead cat in the barn. The neighbors saw him. He ran away. He wandered for 3 years. He stole. He starved. Mei Lin found him in a port town, filthy, hungry, angry. She brought him to Hellsgard. Daniel looked at him, skinny. His eyes were haunted. His hands were clenched into fists. There was a knife scar on his face. "Thomas, you know how to raise the dead." The boy flinched. He cowered. He expected a blow, or a shout, or chains. Here, it's not a crime. Here, it's a job. "I'll teach you." Thomas looked at him. He didn't believe it. Then he saw the skeletons in the field, working, plowing, silent, and he began to cry. Not out of fear, out of relief. Daniel began teaching him the next day. Thomas was weak. Weaker than Daniel had been at the start. 2 skeletons at most, but it was a start. Daniel taught him the way a manager trains an intern. No theory, just practice. Here's a bone. Here's a capsule. Here's a command. Clear, simple, repeat. Thomas repeated. He made mistakes. He repeated again. A month later, he was holding 5 skeletons. 2 months later, 8. The boy turned out to be capable. It was just that no one had ever taught him. No one had ever given him a chance. Daniel jotted it down in his notebook. Necromancer trainee, 1. Need 4 more, at least, to ensure the system's stability. The dreams grew more frequent, every night. A dark hall, a stone throne, a figure in rusty armor, a voice without sound, a vibration in his bones. Asher, duty, Asher, time. Daniel would wake up drenched in sweat. He'd sit up in bed, sit in the dark, listen to his heart pounding. Then he'd go to the desk, write it down, every dream, the details, the stone, the frost, the armor, the voice. After 2 months of keeping records, he noticed a pattern. The dreams intensified when the wind blew from the forest, and the wind was blowing from the forest more and more often. Ariel noticed it too. "My lord, the forest is restless." "What do you mean, restless?" "The trees at the edge of the forest sway even when there's no wind. Birds haven't flown into the forest for a month now. And the smell. Can you smell it?" Daniel could smell it. The smell of old earth. Swedish. Rotten. It had grown stronger. Before, you had to get close to the edge of the forest to smell it. Now you could smell it from the village. The skeletons who worked closer to the forest had started acting strangely. They hadn't broken down. They hadn't malfunctioned. But Daniel sensed a tremor in them. Subtle. Barely noticeable. As if someone were pulling them toward them. Not his team. Someone else's. He moved the skeletons a kilometer away from the forest. Strange bones. Those very same anomalous bones that the skeletons had found at the edge of the forest. There were more of them now. Many more. They were now lying not 10 steps from the forest, but 30. The forest was expanding. Slowly. 1 centimeter a day. But it was expanding. Daniel called a council meeting. He showed them the records, the map, the graphs of the forest's movement. Tobias had drawn them. The line crept outward. A little farther each week. In a year, the forest would reach the fields. In 2 years, the city. Soyeon looked at the map. She was silent. Ariel frowned. Ralph placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. Catherine took notes. Maylin was calculating something in her head. Lydia prayed silently. Jorgen sat and looked at Daniel. With a heavy gaze. That very one. The one that said, I knew. I knew the forest would come. I always knew. Daniel looked at the old man. Jorgen, tell me about the old baron. Jorgen was silent for a moment. Then he began, slowly, like a man who had been silent for a long time and was now unsure if he remembered how to speak. His grandfather had told him. His grandfather had heard it from his own grandfather, 200 years ago. Baron Alberic Asher, the last true baron of Hellsgard. A necromancer. Powerful. Not like Daniel. Stronger. He raised hundreds, perhaps thousands. The undead came from the forest. An army. Not a wild one. An organized one. Led by a knight. In icy armor. His name was the First. Alberic went out to face him, with an army of the living and the dead. And he lost. Not because he was weak, because the First offered a deal. A pact. No one knows what kind of pact. Alberic accepted, and he lost. The forest took him, took his army, took half the inhabitants of Hellsgard. The rest fled. They returned 10 years later. They found an empty land, sour, dead, and silence from the forest, a silence that lasted 200 years, until Daniel. Daniel listened. He nodded. He took notes. Then he closed his notebook. I am his heir. I inherited more than just the title. I inherited a debt. Silence. Then Catherine looked up from her notes. Legally, the deceased's debt passes to the heir only if the heir has accepted the inheritance. Did you accept a title voluntarily? That means you've accepted the obligations as well, whatever they may be. Daniel looked at her. He smiled. Even here, even in a magical world with the undead and a cursed forest, a lawyer will find a legal basis. I need to go into the forest. No. Everyone said it at once. Jorgen, Maylin, Ariel, Ralph, Lydia. Even Soyeon looked up from her phone. No. Daniel looked at them, at each one. I need to find out what he wants. This first one. What debt? What Alberic took? Until I know, I can't protect the city. He's right. Catherine said that. Everyone looked at her. You can't negotiate without knowing what's at stake. The Baron is right. He has to find out the terms. Negotiations. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Negotiations. Not war. I'm not a military commander. I'm a manager. Managers negotiate. He went to the forest the next day. Alone. Without the skeletons. The skeletons in the forest were trembling. An alien will was pulling at them. It's dangerous to take them along. He stood at the edge of the forest. Black trees. Blue leaves. A crunch underfoot. The smell of earth and rot. Cold. Not winter's cold, a different kind. A deep cold, like from a well. Daniel closed his eyes. He reached into the forest with a necromantic sense. Deep. Deeper than ever before. Past the bones near the surface. Past the animal remains. Past the old graves. Deeper. And he found it. Enormous. Cold. Ancient. It lay at the center of the forest, beneath the ground. Neither dead nor alive, in between. Sleeping but awakening. And it sensed him. A voice. Not a sound. Pressure inside his skull. Asher. You have come. Daniel stood his ground. His head was splitting. Blood began to flow from his nose. He didn't back down. I am Daniel Asher, Baron of Hellsgard. I have come to learn the terms of the debt. A pause. A long one. Then the pressure eased, slightly. Come in. Daniel opened his eyes. Before him in the forest lay a path. Black. Smooth. As if laid out. It hadn't been there yesterday. He took a step. A second. A third. The forest parted. The trees moved their branches aside. Not warmly, like a jailer opening a door. He walked for 2 hours. The path led downward, under the hill, into a cave, into a hall. The very one from his dreams. Stone walls, frost on the floor, and a throne. A knight sat on the throne.
rusty armor, an icy visor. Behind him, darkness. No face. Emptiness. Figures stood around the throne. Dozens. Hundreds. People in icy shackles, frozen in place. Not dead. Not alive. In between. Peasants, soldiers, children, women, old people. They've been standing here for 200 years. Waiting. Daniel looked at them. At their faces. Frozen in their final expressions. Fear. Supplication. Resignation. He felt sick. He swallowed. He held it together. The first to raise his head was Asher. "You see my collection." Daniel looked at the knight. "The collection. Your ancestor took from me what belonged to me. Land. My land. Hellsguard stands on my bones. On the bones of my soldiers. My army. We were the first to come here. We were the first to die here. This land is ours. Alberic came after us. He built a castle. On our graves. And when I demanded justice, he made a deal. To return the land. In 100 years. Peacefully. 200 years have passed. The debt has doubled. I took people. One per year. A caravan driver. A peasant. A child. Payment for every year overdue. 1,200 people over 200 years. Daniel looked at the figures in their icy shackles. 1,200. Alive. Frozen. Preserved. Why? They're mine. Just as the land is mine. I need people for my land. The dead knight wants to build his own kingdom. Out of frozen people. On cursed land. Madness. But madness with its own logic. What do you want from me? Give me back my land. Hellsguard. All 40,000 hectares. And add 5,000 living people to my collection. Yours. In exchange, I'll go back to the forest. For the next 200 years. Daniel stood there in silence. 5,000 living souls. His entire city. Everyone he had fed. Clothed. Taught. Protected. Over the past year and a half. Every single one. By name. No. The first one bowed his head. Then I'll come myself. And take them. Daniel turned around. He walked out. The forest didn't hold him back. The path led back. Into the light. Into the open air. He emerged from the forest. Fell to his knees. He threw up. Blood from his nose ran down his chin. His head was buzzing. He was on all fours on the frozen ground, breathing. Then he stood up. Wiped his face. Walked home. To Hellsguard. To his people. To the notebook. To the table. To the map. To the system. Daniel sat in City Hall. Before him lay the map, the notebook, the ink, the full council. He told them everything, without holding anything back. The first, the agreement. 1,200 frozen. The demand, the refusal. There was a long silence. Then Jorgen spoke. His voice was hoarse. 1,200. Over 200 years. My grandfather. He disappeared when he went into the forest to gather firewood. I was 7. So? Daniel nodded. So. Jorgen closed his eyes. He clenched his fists on the table, his knuckles turned white. Then he opened his eyes. Wet. Red. What shall we do, my lord? Think. Mei Lin. Resources. What do we have? Mei Lin opened the book. 3,500 living. 300 trained archers. 100 crossbowmen. 50 spearmen. 110 of Daniel's skeletons. 8 of Thomas's skeletons. A 4-month supply of grain. A supply of 12,000 arrows. A supply of 3,000 crossbow bolts. Daniel listened. He took notes. Then he looked at Ariel. Reconnaissance. What's in the forest? Ariel paused. I flew over it. High up. I can't see through the treetops, but I can sense it. Cold. Movement. A lot of movement. Something is moving beneath the trees. Not beasts. Something more. How many? I don't know, but a lot. Daniel nodded. He turned to Ralph. Defense. Ralph shook his head. Against a living army we hold our ground. The fortifications are strong. The archers are trained. But if the undead come out of the forest, skeletons, ice soldiers,
Hundreds or thousands. We don't know what we're up against. Daniel agreed. They didn't know. And that was the most dangerous part. Fighting an unknown enemy. Without reconnaissance. Without data. In Iowa, it's like going out into a field at night without a guide or a map. Soyon. Fortifications. What can be built in a month? Soyon pulled out the blueprints. A wall. A full-fledged stone wall around the city. 4 meters high. With towers. With gates. A month's work with 100 skeletons working around the clock. Get to it. Catherine raised her hand. I'll write to the capital, the Royal Army. If the threat is real, the Crown is obligated to help. Right. But don't count on it. The capital is far away. The army is tied up in the east. We're on our own. Lydia. Everyone looked at her. She sat quietly. Her hands were folded. Her face was pale. There's another way. What is it? Father Cassian. Silence. Ariel snorted. The Inquisitor? The one who wanted to burn us? Lydia shook her head. He didn't want to burn us. He wanted to stop what he considered dangerous. And he knows about the forest. Daniel remembered. Cassian's description had mentioned it. He knows more about the treaty than he's saying. Lydia, go on. Father Cassian has served the Church of Light for 50 years. The church keeps archives. Old archives. About the war 200 years ago. About the first one. About the treaty. If anyone knows the first one's weakness, it's the church. Daniel looked at her. A priest's daughter. She thought like a priest. Through faith. Through books. Through the knowledge preserved within the walls of the temples. And she was right. I need to meet with Cassian. Lydia nodded. I'll go with you. They set out 2 days later. Daniel. Lydia. Ariel as air cover. 4 days to Mervale. A familiar road. The same rutted road Daniel had traveled a year and a half ago in a one-horse wagon. Now he was riding on horseback. In fine clothes. Wearing the Baron's ring. Bearing the seal of the free city. A different man. Mervale gave them a cold reception. The new Margrave was not pleased, but he did not refuse them either. He was afraid. The royal edict hung over him like a sword. The Church of Light in Mervale. A stone cathedral. Old, dark, smelling of incense and wax. Father Cassian received them in his study. A small room. Books from floor to ceiling. Candles. An old man. 70 years old. Thin. Upright. Eyes clear and stern. He looked at Daniel without hatred. Without fear. With judgment. Baron Asher. Necromancer. Builder. Farmer. I've heard a lot. Daniel sat down. Lydia sat beside him. Father Cassian. I didn't come here to argue about faith. I came to ask about the forest. Cassian leaned back in his chair. He looked at Daniel for a long time, then at Lydia. Lydia O'Tree, Marcus O'Tree's daughter. I knew your father. A good man. A poor theologian, but a good man. Lydia pressed her lips together, but she said nothing. Cassian turned to Daniel. What do you want to know? Everything. Cassian stood up. He walked over to the bookshelf. He took out a book. An old one. The leather cover was cracked. The pages were yellowed. He placed it on the table. The Chronicle of Bishop Willem. Written 10 years after the war. The only detailed source. Daniel opened it. He read. Cassian commented. The first. His real name was Harold. A knight. A man. Once alive. He came to this land 400 years ago. Before Astorn. Before the kingdom. Before the people. He came with an army. And he died here. In battle against something that had lived in the forest even before him. But he didn't leave. He stayed. His army stayed. Bound by an oath. Bound to the land. They became part of the forest. And the forest became part of them. Not a curse. A symbiosis. When Alberic Asher built a castle on their land, they awoke. Not out of malice. Out of pain. Their graves were disturbed. Their land was plowed. Their bones were unearthed. Alberic used their bones for his necromancy. Just like Daniel. Without asking. Without respect. Daniel closed the book. He looked at Cassian. Their bones. I'm using their bones. Cassian nodded.
Every skeleton you dig up from the soil of Helgard is one of Harold's soldiers. His man, his subject. You're stealing his people, Baron, and using them as laborers. Silence. Daniel sat motionless. 110 skeletons. His workforce. His system. His farm. Built on the bones of others. Without asking. Without respect. Just like Alberic. He closed his eyes. Opened them. What does it take to end this? Cassian looked at him. For a long time. Then he said, return the bones. All of them. Return the people. All of them. 1,200. And acknowledge that the land belongs to them. Daniel stood there, staring out the window. Outside the window, the gray sky of Mervale. Give everything back. Lose everything. The skeletons, the workforce, the system. Go back to square one. Or find another way. Cassian, you said the first one was a human, a knight. He wanted land, people, a home. Cassian nodded. Those are the same things I want. Cassian looked at him with a new expression, interest, keen. What do you propose, Baron? Negotiations. Not war. Not surrender. A partnership. Cassian was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said quietly, Baron, I still consider you dangerous, but I no longer consider you evil. Let's talk about the forest. They spoke until dawn, the end of the second year. Winter. The first emerged from the cursed forest. Ariel spotted him an hour later. Movement. Large. From the forest. They're coming. Daniel stood on the tower. He watched. A figure in rusty armor emerged from the black trees. Behind it, a column. Not an army of skeletons. 1,200 people in icy shackles. They walked slowly, mechanically. Their eyes were open, empty, frozen. Peasants. Soldiers. Children. Women. 200 years of captivity. The first one stopped at the edge of the fields. He raised his visor. Darkness beneath him. A voice that made the glass in Ariel's lantern shatter. Baron Asher. I have come to collect a debt. Return to me what your great-grandfather took. Or I'll take your harvest, your people, and your land. Daniel came down from the tower. He walked through the town. Past the houses. Past the bakery. Past the blacksmith shop where Martin stood with a hammer in his hand. Past City Hall. Past the white stone chapel. Past the school. Past the mill. Past every building he had built over the past 2 years. With his skeletons. With other people's bones. He walked out through the gate. Alone. Without skeletons. Behind him, the entire town of Hellsgard stood in the snow. 5,000 living people. 110 skeletons were missing. Daniel had disembodied them that morning. All of them. The bones lay in neat rows in the town hall courtyard. 110 sets. Labeled. Numbered. Tobias had recorded each one. The council found out an hour before the first's departure. Maylin turned pale. Ariel screamed. Ralph clenched his fists. Soyeon smoked 3 pipes in a row in silence. Catherine took notes, her hands trembling. Lydia prayed. Jurgen looked at Daniel with that same heavy gaze. Then he nodded. One, I trust you, his lord. Daniel stood before the first. The knight towered over him by 2 heads. His armor was covered in frost. Cold radiated from him in waves. The snow beneath the first's feet did not melt. It froze deeper. Daniel took a notebook from his bosom. He opened it to a blank page. All right, let's count your debt. 1 person at a time. The first bowed his head. Count. You are the ancestor of 200 soldiers who lie in the soil of Hellsgard. 200. That number comes from Bishop Willem's chronicle. 200 of Harold's soldiers died and were buried on the territory of the future barony. The Asher necromancers used their bones for 2 centuries. I used them too, without asking, without respect. As tools, as beasts of burden. It was wrong. The first stood motionless, listening. I returned the bones, all 110 sets. They lie in the courtyard of City Hall, labeled, every single one. If you want to take them, I won't stop you. They're yours. But, Daniel turned the page. The 1,200 people you've taken over the past 200 years. They aren't yours. Alberic's contract concerned the land, not the people. It's recorded in Willem's chronicle. Alberic promised to return the land, not the people. You took them yourself as a penalty for late payment. But there's no clause in the contract about interest. The first one didn't move. Daniel continued to press his point. I'm a lawyer. Or rather, I have a lawyer. Dr. Lawrence has studied the chronicle. The treaty between Alberic Asher and Knight Harold stipulated the return of the land after 100 years. The land was not returned. That is a breach. But taking hostages as compensation is not provided for by any law, neither royal, nor by ecclesiastical law, nor by the law that was in effect 400 years ago when you were alive. You took people without any right to do so. He was the first to raise his hand. Slowly. Daniel did not back down. The law. You're talking to me about the law. Boy, I've been dead for 400 years. What right? The right that you yourself recognized when you were alive. You were a knight, Harold. You took an oath. To protect the weak. Not to harm the innocent. Not to take hostages. That's your code. Not mine. Silence. The wind died down. The snow had stopped falling. Even the forest had fallen silent. The first stood there, looking at Daniel. Emptiness beneath the visor. But something was stirring within that emptiness. Something old and weary. You came without an army, without skeletons, with a notebook. Daniel nodded. I'm not a warrior. I'm not a commander. I'm a manager. I calculate. I plan. I build. And I've come with a proposal. The first remained silent. He waited. Hellsgard stands on your land. That's a fact. I can't return the land because 5,000 people live there. They have nowhere else to go. But I can acknowledge that the land is yours, officially, by law. I can call Hellsgard what it is, a city on Harold's land. And I can give you what you really want. The first bowed his head. What I really want. A home. You want a home. Your soldiers want peace. For 400 years you've stood in the darkness, underground, in icy armor. That's not life. That's not death. That's torment. Silence. Long. I propose a memorial, in Hellsgard's central square, made of stone, with the names of each of the 200 soldiers whose bones lie in this soil. Every single one. If you tell me the names, I will carve each one. Soyon will design it. Martin will forge it. Lydia will bless it. They will be remembered. Not as the undead, as people, as soldiers who came first and died on this land. The first one stood, motionless. The snow began to fall again, quietly, gently, and release the hostages. 1,200. They are not yours. They were never yours. They are victims of someone else's treaty. Let them go. And I promise. Not like Alberic. Not on paper. Personally. Every year, on the day you came to this land, Hellsgard will remember. A celebration. Founding Day. Not mine. Yours. Because you were here first. The first stood there. A minute. 2. 3. Behind him, 1,200 frozen figures stood in the snow. Icy shackles glinted in the gray light. Then the first lowered his hand. Slowly. Harold. Daniel didn't understand. My name. Harold. You're the first one to call me by name in 400 years. Daniel looked at him. You were a knight, Harold. You defended people. You died for them. That deserves a name. Silence. Then a sound. Soft. Like ice cracking in spring. The shackles on the first figure in the column cracked. A man fell into the snow. Alive. Breathing. An old man. Gray-haired. His eyes were wild. He lay in the snow, breathing. The cracking spread through the entire column. One after another. The shackles split open. People fell. Into the snow. To their knees. On their backs. Someone was screaming. Someone was crying. Someone lay silently, gazing at the sky they hadn't seen in 200 years. Daniel turned around. Lydia was already running. With the women. With blankets. Gustav was opening the bakery. Martin was coming out of the blacksmith shop. Ralph was rallying the archers. Not for battle, to help, to carry, to keep them warm, to feed them. The system was working, without Daniel's orders. The council was making decisions. Maylin was assigning accommodations. Tobias was taking notes. Eric was running between sections. Soyeon was unlocking empty houses. Catherine was preparing documents. Ariel was flying over the column and counting from above. 1,193. Alive. 7 didn't wake up. Too long. 400 years as a dead knight. 400 years of icy captivity. 7 didn't make it. Daniel wrote down their names. When he finds out, every single one. The first one stood and watched as his hostages left, toward the people, toward the warmth, toward life. Then he turned to Daniel. Memorial, with their names. Yes, every year, on the day it was founded. Yes. You promise? Personally. The first nodded, slowly. Then he turned to Les, his soldiers. Shadows, dark figures among the trees. They were waiting. Let's go. Home. He walked toward the forest, slowly, with difficulty. His armor creaked. Frost flaked off. At the edge of the forest, he stopped. He turned around. Baron Asher. Daniel was looking at him. The formation was in good order. Then the first stepped into the forest. The trees closed in behind him. The shadows vanished. The wind died down. The smell of rot faded. The forest stood there, dark, silent, but no longer hostile. Just a forest. Just a dark old forest with the graves of soldiers whose were never named. Daniel stood in the snow, a notebook in his hand, open to a page of notes. He closed it, tucked it into his coat. He turned toward the city. Hellsguard stood in the snow, smoke rising from the chimneys, lights in the windows, shouts, cries, laughter. 1,193 people were returning to life. His city was welcoming them, without an order, without a plan, simply because that's how the system he built works. A system made up of people who know what to do. Daniel walked down the street, past the chapel where Lydia was praying with the freed people, past the bakery where Gustav was handing out bread, past the blacksmith shop where Martin was heating water for those suffering from frostbite, past City Hall where Catherine was recording names, past the school where Tobias was finding homes for the children, past Maylin, who was already calculating the grain supply for 1,000 new mouths to feed, past Soyeon, who was drawing up the expansion plan, past Ariel, who was sitting on the roof and looking out at the forest, calmly, without fear, past Ralph, who was standing by the gate and looking at the road, just at the road, past Jorgen. The old man was standing by his house, on Jorgen Street, Hellsguard's main street, the one Daniel had named during his lifetime. Jorgen looked at Daniel. His eyes were wet. My lord, you brought them back, without a fight, with a notebook. Daniel nodded. With a notebook, Jorgen. The old man shook his head. Then he hugged him, tightly, briefly, for the first time. He let go, went back into the house. Daniel stood on the street of his town, 5,000 residents, soon to be 6. The school, city hall, the chapel, the blacksmith shop, the mill, the sewer system, trade routes, the police, the council, the charter. An apprentice necromancer. A memorial for him that doesn't exist yet but will. All of this from nothing. From 42 pests and 2 months' worth of grain. From a gaunt body with dark circles under the eyes. From the memory of Iowa. From a notebook filled with tables. He walked into City Hall, sat down at a table, opened the notebook, a blank page. He wrote, Year 3, Plan. Item 1, Harold's Memorial, a white stone. Soyeon is designing it, 200 names. Item 2, Housing for 1,193 liberated people. Homes, food, work. Lydia is coordinating. Item 3, New necromancers. We need 4 more. The system must not depend on a single person. Item 4,
Bones for skeletons. A new source. Not from the lands of Helgard. We cannot take bones from outsiders. Negotiate with Cassian regarding cemeteries outside Harold's territory, or find another way. Item 5. School of Agrarian Magic. First intake. 10 students. Thomas teaches the basics. Daniel supplements the curriculum. Point 6. An agreement with the Crown on applying the Hellsguard model to other tainted lands. Catherine is preparing the documents. He wrote, for a long time, point by point, page by page. Each point represents a specific person, a specific problem, a specific solution. It was getting dark outside. Someone brought tea, Henrik. The old man was still nearby. 7 years as a servant. A year and a half as a witness to a miracle. He set the mug on the table, silently. Then he left. Daniel drank his tea and wrote. Then he paused. He looked out the window, the dark sky, the stars, a distant stretch of the forest. Quiet, peaceful. He thought about the bridge over the Raccoon River, about the headlights in the water, about the night he fell asleep at the wheel and died. Or maybe he didn't. 200 years ago, a voice from the forest had said, I have chosen you. Of all the worlds where your blood flows, you are Asher. You must. Maybe. Or maybe he'd just fallen asleep and woken up in the right place, at the right time, with the right knowledge, and with a notebook that turned out to be mightier than a sword. Daniel closed the notebook. He stood up, stretched, glanced at the watch he didn't have, estimated the time by the stars. It was late. He had to get up early tomorrow, patrol the districts, check on the new residents' accommodations, meet with Thomas about the training schedule, lunch with Soyan to discuss the memorial project, an evening with Catherine to work on documents for the Crown. He smiled, quietly, to himself. Then he walked out of City Hall. He walked down Jorgen Street, toward the tower, toward his room with the peeling plaster that had long since been repaired, to the straw mattress that had long since been replaced with a proper bed, to the window overlooking the field. Empty now. Winter. But in the spring it will turn green. The skeletons will plow it. People will sow it. The earth will respond. As always. Daniel lay down. He closed his eyes. He didn't see the dark hall. He didn't hear the voice. For the first time in 6 months, his sleep was peaceful, just dark and warm, like the earth that had finally ceased to be cursed.